Was literally the most innocent and genuine person I've ever known.
Viciously attacked in her own home.
What I saw was just absolutely horrific. This child went through hell.
Who would have a reason to want to kill this girl?
Police are desperate to find the killer before he strikes again.
It's panic.
There is somebody capable of doing what they did to Missy out there, and we don't have it.
But a dark trail of evidence.
He actually wound up weeping kind of in a fetal position.
This is bizarre. This is strange.
Leads them to a suspect
This was someone hiding in plain sight.
they could have never imagined.
No one would have known that. Not anybody.
The city of Arlington is the home of 2 professional sports teams and a major amusement park.
There's something for everybody. And if you can't find something to do, then you've got a problem.
But in early April 1994, this idyllic community was rocked to its core.
911.
And it started when police received a 911 call from the Holly Park apartment complex.
911, 825.
Woke up 3:30 in the morning, smelling smoke. I walk into my living room. There's so much smoke that I can't see. It's panic. There's a fire. We need to get out.
Residents quickly evacuate the building as firefighters arrive to battle the blaze.
You're totally helpless. You just sit there and watch everything go up in flames.
Still think about it. Just how close I came to dying.
Firefighters track the fire to its source, an apartment on the 2nd floor. Once inside, they make a horrific discovery.
Firefighters discovered a body in the bedroom. This was not just someone falling asleep in bed smoking. This was something more.
Homicide investigators are quickly summoned and try to make sense of the devastating scene.
I was informed of what the fire department had found and what they reported. We had a body inside of a burning home. Detective Stanton and I make entry into the apartment. The fire is out, but there's still a lot of damage.
Virtually everything has got like a coating of this black, nasty soot.
Fire marshals could actually smell the gasoline and were able to see pour patterns. This was an intentionally set fire.
The trail of destruction leads all the way to the bed.
What I saw was just absolutely horrific. I've seen bad crime scenes, and I've seen crime scenes involving people that were burnt in fires. This was elevated. A young lady who you could see, even with the smoke damage and the burn damage, you could still see that this was a victim of a very brutal sexual assault. The body was laying on her back on the bed. The positioning is consistent with sexual assault. She had trauma to her face, as though she had been physically assaulted. Clearly, there was a puncture mark in the middle of her chest. This child went through hell.
It was like nothing I've ever seen. You know, who would do something as horrible as this?
A lot of evidence was destroyed simply because of the fire damage. But we found what we believe might have been the murder weapon. There was a knife in the sink.
But fire damage to the knife has robbed investigators of the forensic evidence needed to link it to the killer.
Had that fire not been set, we probably would have had latent prints. No telling what we would have had.
Investigators collect the knife for testing and manage to salvage some papers that survived the inferno. For detectives, the most important goal is to identify their victim.
We found out that that apartment was, in fact, leased and occupied by one occupant, identified as Missy Gruball, 19-year-old college student from Burleson.
I can remember standing on the lawn, and I said, "There's Missy's car, but she's not out here with us. She was not accounted for."
So we had a general idea who our victim was, but that was not confirmed.
This body was so distorted that they had to use a forensic odontologist to confirm Missy as the victim.
Once we've identified the victim as Missy Gruball, we talked to her family in Burleson, and it's gut-wrenching. Missy's mother was devastated.
I had a daughter myself. That sort of hits home.
As investigators meet with Missy's family, word of her death spreads through the small community.
When I heard the news, my heart just dropped. Missy was so innocent and so pure and such an honest soul. She was so much fun, very friendly, nurturing. She would have given anything to help anybody. She was literally the most genuine person I've ever known. We were very active in church, she and I both were. Missy was very strong in her faith, very moral. She was always the person to do the right thing, always.
In high school, her strength went beyond her faith.
Missy was very focused. She was a very hard worker. That's how she was so successful in school. She was in the high school band. She played the French horn, and she was amazing at it.
Even as a teenager, Missy had a clear vision of what she wanted and the drive to get it.
She wanted to go to the University of Texas at Arlington, and she wanted to get her own apartment. But she didn't want to burden her mother financially. So Missy was working to support herself to afford to be able to go to school.
But even though she wanted to stand on her own, Missy's heart stayed close to home.
She probably spoke with her mom every day on the phone. Missy and her mother were very close. They were a team in life and treasured each other.
You cannot describe the pain that Missy's mother went through. But I'll let her know, I really need you. You're going to help me find who did this to Missy, because she knew her daughter better than probably anybody.
Missy's mother tells detectives what she knows of Missy's activities on the last night of her life.
Well, Missy worked these late hours as a food server. She would always let her mother know that I'm home, I'm safe. On the night of Missy's murder, she'd call her mother late at night when she got home.
She finished her phone call with her mom and then dispatch getting a phone call that the apartment's on fire, establishing kind of a window as to when the actual murder would have occurred.
Police determined that Missy had been killed sometime between midnight and 3:30 a.m. It's not much for detectives to go on, but when they arrive back in Arlington, they have an unexpected lead waiting.
Once the victim's name had been released, one of our officers came forward and said, I took a report listing your victim.
A week prior to the death, Missy Gruball filed a police report on a guy that's staying with Missy who stole from her, and I'm thinking that very well could be our killer. We need to find this person. We need to talk to him. We need to get him in here as soon as possible.
Coming up, detectives track a dangerous suspect.
This individual made threats against her
and soon uncover a lead they never expected.
It caught my attention immediately. Something is very suspicious here.
That puts them face to face with Missy's attacker.
I said, "You killed Missy Grubaugh. Let's start talking about this."
Arlington police detectives are searching for the killer of Texas college student Missy Grubaugh. They've learned that the 19-year-old co-ed filed a police report a week before her death.
Missy had reported a co-worker took her tip jars, over $1,000 worth of tips.
Missy took the semester off in order to save more money, so all of her tip money was being hoarded so she could go back next semester to college.
The police report describes how Missy named a Charles Johnson as the potential thief, and that he had been staying with her before her money disappeared. Detectives speak to Missy's friends to find out more about Charles and his relationship to Missy.
Charles was a co-worker and apparently was someone that she thought was a friend of hers.
She socialized with coworkers, typically after work.
Young people she worked with, that's her crowd. Charles Johnson at that time, we are told, was homeless. And so Missy, being the very generous individual that she is, allows him to come stay with her. In fact, she even gave him a key to her apartment.
Missy was very kind-hearted, and I think that it was very easy for some people to take advantage of kind-hearted people.
Talking with her friends, there was a common theme about Missy. She was not only incredibly sweet, but incredibly naive. Too pure to see the bad in people. As an investigator, and that scares me because I see someone who is easily victimized.
Only days after Charles moved in, Missy discovers she has been played.
Missy finds out one day that about $1,000 is gone from her tip jar. Well, the only person that could have done that was Charles Johnson.
Enraged, Missy confronts Charles about the theft and kicks him out of her home.
Something else that was very important from everything that I learned about Missy was she will also stand up for what's right. So Missy immediately calls the police.
Missy filed a police report, and a theft charge warrant was issued for Charles's arrest.
Here's some motive right here. This is retaliation for getting me in trouble. And so he's immediately on our radar. We want to see this guy. We want to talk to him. Problem is, we didn't know where he was at. It's hard to find somebody who is basically homeless, and we had detectives that were assigned to find him.
While police search for Johnson, Missy's autopsy report comes in. It confirms investigators' belief that the fire is not what killed her.
The autopsy findings demonstrated she was dead before the fire started. She should have inhaled some smoke. We should have seen some soot. We should have seen some carbon monoxide in her blood. That's not the case here at all. She had a bruise of her left eye and an injury on the brow ridge that would be consistent with being struck by a fist or another object. Injuries directed that show that the assailant wanted to feel in control and dominant. A fatal stab wound to the chest was the actual cause of death. But it went completely through her heart and damaged her left lung, and there was a massive internal bleeding.
The autopsy also confirms detectives' worst suspicions. The attack was sexual in nature.
She had been forcibly penetrated. This was a rape homicide by a very aggressive perpetrator.
Though the fire destroyed physical evidence at the scene, the medical examiner immediately notifies detectives of a major discovery.
We did a search of the body for any remnant evidence that wasn't destroyed by the fire. Semen was recovered that could be analyzed for DNA.
Forensic evidence and physical evidence is great. You've got to have it. It leads you to your killer. So that semen was a forensic link to the suspect.
The semen is sent for DNA analysis, hoping it will point to the killer. But detectives make a calculated decision not to make the information public.
The fact that she was sexually assaulted was not public, it was not released. And the reason for that is because it's what we call guilt knowledge evidence. And it's knowledge that is only known by the person who did the crime. You never reveal that because that can lead you to that suspect to identify him. That's very powerful evidence.
Other evidence is piling up too. Among the documents collected from Missy's apartment, detectives discover a treasure trove of personal letters.
These were letters from someone named Ivan Villa. The nature of the letters indicated some type of relationship between this individual and Missy Grubaugh. We don't know if it was romantic or not, but some type of close personal relationship. So that's important. We needed to find out who this individual was.
Detectives do a background check on Ivan, and they're alarmed by what they uncover.
Ivan was a registered sex offender. And that just set the hairs on the back of my neck up.
Yeah, this is the sort of individual that we're looking for. Let's go find Ivan right away.
Detectives investigating the rape and murder of Missy Grubaugh have found letters in the victim's apartment that reveal she was having a relationship with Ivan Villa, a young man with a dark past.
He was, in fact, flagged as a sex offender. And so he's immediately on our radar because we know that Missy was sexually assaulted.
Detectives examine the letters between Missy and Ivan and discover that they had a tumultuous relationship.
The context of those letters looked like a conflict of two young adults trying to make something work in a relationship that is filled with confusion.
The conflict centered around how far Missy would allow the relationship to go physically.
Missy was very moral. It was an admirable thing in our faith to remain pure until we were married. It's something that Missy took very seriously.
The letters suggest that Ivan and Missy may have come too close to crossing the line.
Apparently, there might have been times where they went a little further than Missy was comfortable with. You could tell that she was upset about that.
Missy's friends knew that she was not one to back down under pressure.
If she felt like she was being taken advantage of, then she would stand up for herself. And I admired that about her so much.
Bottom line is, we need to bring Ivan in. We need to talk to him because he was, in fact, in some level of a relationship with Missy at the time of her death.
2 days after Missy's murder, detectives bring Ivan in for an interview. He claims that he and Missy were working through their issues in a kind and loving way.
Ivan told me that he cared for Missy, and he wanted a relationship with her. He certainly did want to have that relationship go a step further, but Missy was convicted to her beliefs and to her faith. They were also battling with the fact that he had this crime over his head.
Ivan tells detectives he was home alone asleep the night Missy was murdered.
That's not an acceptable alibi for myself or Detective Stanton.
But was it really possible this young man could have committed such a horrible crime?
When you start talking about the personality of who you're looking for, you gotta be careful. If you start picturing this person as this evil predator, you may miss the actual killer. That's why you have to follow the evidence. The fact that we had semen from the crime scene means we have forensic evidence that would either connect him or exclude him.
Detectives ask Ivan to provide DNA samples. But until those test results are revealed, detectives do not have grounds to hold Ivan in custody.
In 1994, those tests usually took anywhere from 4 to 6 weeks.
While waiting for results on DNA tests for Ivan and searching for Missy's former coworker Charles Johnson, detectives continue their investigation by canvassing Missy's friends at the restaurant and learn something that adds another suspect to the list. Although this time, this suspect could be at the very top.
The name Jeffrey Smith came up. Her work associates told us that Jeffrey Smith was an employee there who Missy reported and got him in trouble at work. What we were being told is that really upset him and angered him.
Restaurant staff tell the detectives that Jeffrey had threatened to kill Missy during an outburst, and he was fired a few weeks later after getting into a fight with a manager.
What we are being told is this individual was hot-tempered, and he had made threats against her. So we're putting all of this together and thinking, yeah, we really need to talk to this guy.
But who could imagine a coworker committing such a horrendous crime? Detectives speak with another employee at the restaurant who knows Jeffrey well.
His girlfriend, Kristen, agreed to come in to speak with Detective Stan and I.
Visibly nervous, Kristen paints a troubling picture of her boyfriend.
Kristen told us that they were living together, but she also shared that she was concerned with his personality. He was very volatile. She was afraid of him, and she did not feel safe being there with him. She was going to move out and move back with her parents in Denton.
But it wasn't just fear for what Jeffrey might do that was causing Kristen to leave him. It was a fear of what he'd already done.
What Kristen wanted us to know, and she was very open about it, was she actually suspected that Jeff was involved in the murder of Missy.
Detectives investigating the murder of 19-year-old Missy Gruba are interviewing Kristen Waller, a young woman who believes her boyfriend, Jeffrey Smith, could be the killer.
She just basically said, this is what my belief is. So I asked why. How did she formulate that? Kristen told us the night of Missy's murder, Jeff did not come to the apartment, and he didn't come back all night. So she didn't know where he was at. She also knew the conflict between her and him. So she's putting all this together, and she actually believed that Jeff was with Missy on that night and that he committed this crime.
Kristen gives detectives the phone number for where Jeff is staying. A background check shows the 22-year-old has no criminal history, but detectives are still suspicious.
We know that he had made some threats against Missy, and his whereabouts are unknown on the night of her death, so we needed to talk to him. I called Jeff Smith after speaking with Kristen, and he actually was cooperative and agreed to come to the police department.
In the interview room, detectives are struck by Jeff's demeanor.
Jeff Smith was smiling and nonchalant, just really not taking the entire situation that serious. I asked him, what was your relationship like with Missy Gruba? His story was she was infatuated with him. And as a matter of fact, her infatuation is what created the problems and the conflict between him and Kristen. Kristen's telling us, no, I'm moving out because the guy scares me to death.
Jeff also has a conflicting account of his alibi.
He gave us this excuse that he was with Kristen. We already had information that he was not.
When detectives suggest Jeff is lying to them about his alibi, he laughs them off.
I've seen this type of personality before. He's narcissistic, he's cocky, he's arrogant. And I certainly wasn't going to take anything that he said at face value.
Despite their concerns about Jeff, detectives have no evidence to connect him to Missy's murder and are forced to let him go. But before he leaves, they ask him for a DNA sample. And to their surprise, he agrees.
He did give us the samples that we needed for forensic analysis that would certainly connect or exclude him from the murder.
Then, 4 days after Missy's murder, Detective Lenore gets a frantic call from Kristen about Jeffrey Smith.
He had abducted Kristen earlier in the morning, physically abducted her and drove off with her from her parents' home in Denton.
Kristen tells Detective Lenore that Jeff was distraught and held her in an apartment for 8 hours, threatening to kill her if she tried to leave.
Kristen's telling us the motive was that Jeff just didn't want her to leave him. He released her safely a little later that day, but now she didn't know where he was at. She was definitely afraid of him. She contacted the Denton Police Department and ended up getting a warrant for his arrest for kidnapping. He became a fugitive. You've got this guy who is a loose cannon, and there was a level of urgency to find him. We put out a national broadcast along with that warrant that he is also a suspect in a murder investigation.
With Kristen safely at her parents' house and police in several states searching for Jeff, detectives in Arlington find their murder investigation in a holding pattern.
As far as Jeff Smith, we do have his hair, his blood, and his saliva for DNA that would certainly connect or exclude him from the murder.
DNA testing is still underway, but days later, investigators do get an important update from the lab.
They were able to type the blood from the semen, and they knew they were looking for someone with a certain type of blood.
Jeff did not match the blood type from the semen.
In addition to Jeffrey Smith, Ivan Villa is also ruled out because of his blood type, leaving Charles Johnson as the only active suspect for Missy's murder. And Charles is still at large.
That is incredibly frustrating because there is somebody capable of doing what they did to Missy out there, and we don't have them.
As the weeks pass with the case unsolved, Missy's family and friends grow more and more concerned.
It was very disheartening for a lot of us. We just watched the news and would hang on to anything that they would mention about it. It made all of us wonder why it happened to Missy. It was just devastating.
Then, a month into the investigation, detectives get a tip from an unexpected source.
I got a call out of the blue from Miss Grubauer. She wanted to let me know that she recalled a conversation that she had with Missy. It was so incredibly bizarre. And I just thought something is very suspicious here.
Detectives hunting the killer of college student Missy Grubauer have just received a lead that has turned up the heat on a case going cold. The victim's mother recalls a detail from the days just before Missy's death.
Missy's mom is providing information about how Missy had talked about this guy, Luis.
He was a 32-year-old man who had come over to the apartment, and the main thing that Mrs. Grubauer remembers is that he talked to her all night long till in the early morning hours, but then they got involved in a pillow fight.
At the time, Mrs. Grubauer thought little of the playful incident, but she suggests maybe Luis could help the investigation with information about Missy. Detectives have a different view.
This is bizarre. This is strange. The 32-year-old man had a pillow fight with her. It caught my attention immediately.
Investigators ask how Missy knew Luis.
Luis worked with Missy, and he lived at the Holly Park Apartments. She had done some babysitting for Louise's baby at the apartment complex.
Detectives' first stop? The restaurant where Missy and Luis both worked. Luis isn't there, but the manager tells them Luis is a model employee.
He was an Army veteran. I learned that about him. No criminal history. Matter of fact, management gave him an award for a heroic act. He actually stopped a robbery.
The detectives ask workers what they knew about Luis's relationship with Missy.
Co-workers described Lewis as a friend. Sometimes after work, they might enjoy a beer together.
Detectives also hear something that catches them off guard.
A work associate relayed to us that Lewis made the comment, and these were his words, is, "I hope they catch that son of a bitch that killed and raped Missy." The fact that she was sexually assaulted, no one should have known that. That was never released. He might have just been speculating, but the fact that it was said really, really alarmed me.
Investigators have uncovered yet another suspicious coworker in Missy's life, one that she saw every day. Detectives asked the manager for Luis's phone number.
Told him I was investigating the death of Missy Grubal and that his name had surfaced from her babysitting his son, and Luis agreed to come see me. He was relaxed, he was polite, pleasant, regular, clean-cut guy. He told us that Missy used to babysit his son and that they worked together. So I told Luis what I want to do is exclude all of the known males to Missy so that I could find the guilty party. And the process in which I do that is I take samples, blood, hair, and saliva, compare it to the DNA, and exclude them.
The request instantly changes Luis's mood.
His response immediately was, what are you talking about? Wasn't the evidence all burnt up? And I said, no, it wasn't. I've got significant incriminating evidence that was specifically left there by the suspect. Now his demeanor is changing, and you can see the concern in his face. I kind of even broke my own rule a little bit here, because a lot of times I don't like to give guilt knowledge information, but the fact that I knew that he had already said something about Missy being sexually assaulted, I went ahead and revealed to him whoever killed Missy sexually assaulted her, and I've got their semen. And Luis immediately says, I've got to go. I have to leave. And I have no legal right to keep him, regardless of what I believe. I just simply asked, Luis, are you going to give me your sample? He says, I got to get out of here. I got to leave. We'll do it Monday.
Monday comes and goes with no sign of Luis, but detectives don't let up.
I call him. He calls me back Tuesday. We make arrangements for Wednesday. Come Wednesday, he doesn't show up again.
Detective Lenore calls Luis at work, but gets some alarming news.
Management had informed us that the woman that he was living with at the time, his common-law wife, had called and said that he had to leave town. I called her. I said, I hear Luis is gone. You and I need to talk.
Jeanette has been living with Luis for 2 years. The couple moved into the Holly Park Apartments 6 months earlier.
They had been together long enough for them to have a child together. She was also pregnant with another child. But what's interesting is on the Monday that Luis was going to meet with me, which was about 3 days earlier, they got married. They got legally married. Well, in Texas, a wife cannot testify against her husband. I mean, those are my thoughts that are going on. I kind of kept that to myself and said, okay, that's interesting.
Jeanette knew Missy as a sweet girl who used to babysit her son and had been shocked to hear about her murder.
And so I asked if she recalls what occurred on the night of Missy's murder. She said Luis had gotten off work about 10:30 or 11 and informed her that he was going to have some drinks with some friends. Then he came in close to midnight, and then she heard him leave.
2 hours later, Jeanette hears Luis return.
She hears him come into the apartment and takes a shower and then leaves again. And then she hears him come back again. She notices that he's coughing and he smells of smoke. His story to her is that he was out jogging and he noticed that there was an apartment on fire. And so he went in there and that he saw this individual on a bed, and he said it was Missy, and he tried to do mouth to mouth. He said, but he couldn't do it, and he was overcome by smoke, and that he had to leave, and he came back. That's it. End of story. They just go to bed. Nobody calls 911. Nobody does anything. They go to sleep. I mean, the story is so bizarre, but she didn't question him. And I don't think she ever really saw it for what it was until she actually sits down and starts telling me. And as she's telling me, reality is setting in as far as what Luis might have done. She's pretty much stunned. I said, I need to go into your apartment. I need to get a search warrant.
Investigators descend on Luis and Jeanette's apartment, just a few buildings over from where Missy was killed.
One of the things that I wanted was his dog tags. Because he was in the Army, I wanted to know what his blood type was. And I wanted to know if the blood type from his dog tags matched the blood type from the semen.
The blood type matches that of Missy's attacker. It's the link detectives have been looking for, and enough to bring Luis in. But first, they'll need to find him.
So I got an arrest warrant for Luis. The next day, I get a teletype that the vehicle that Luis was in was found abandoned and burned in San Antonio.
Detectives believe they have finally uncovered the man who murdered Missy Grubaugh and set fire to her apartment. But Luis Arroyo has fled Arlington. His car found abandoned and set ablaze in San Antonio.
We don't know, but suspected there was evidence there, but the car was pretty much gone. I mean, it was burned up.
There's an urgency. We need to find this person as soon as possible.
Detective Lenore suspects Luis's wife Jeanette knows where he's hiding.
I told her that we realize you had nothing to do with this crime, but you can be a party by covering and by lying. So I said, you realize that when she was murdered, she was sexually assaulted. And when she heard that, you could see it upset her. It angered her.
Confronted with the full horror of what was done to Missy, Jeanette gives up Luis.
Jeanette gave me the address where he was staying in San Antonio. San Antonio Police Department went into the home and arrested Luis without incident.
Detectives Lenore and Stanton traveled to San Antonio to confront Luis Arroyo in person.
It is the most unique interrogation I've ever seen. I mean, Luis really had like a mental regression, and he actually wound up in a ball on the floor, weeping and kind of in a fetal position.
I don't know what he was doing. I just thought he wanted us to have some type of empathy for him.
When Luis finally tells his side of the story, it doesn't add up for detectives.
He did not admit to sexually assaulting Missy Grubaugh. He did admit, yes, I did have sexual intercourse with her. He said, we had consensual sex. I knew it was her first time, and I wanted it to be a very gentle and pleasant experience for her. That just sickened me. What happened to that young lady was anything but gentle and loving. It was brutal.
Faced with Luis's denial, Detective Lenore changes tactics.
I said, you killed Missy Grubaugh. All right, let's start talking about this. And he said, you know, I don't remember. I I remember getting a knife. I think I did stab her.
Detectives are stunned. Is this the confession they've been waiting for?
I'm not going to call it a confession because my definition of a confession is someone who says, this is what I did and I did everything that you have evidence that they committed. Luis gave a statement with several admissions that included guilt knowledge information. Luis did not admit to setting the fire, but he recalls that there was a fire set. He gave us all of this incriminating information that clearly said it was him.
They have enough to charge Luis. But detectives want to make the case against him airtight.
Detective Santa and I got an evidential search warrant and collected his blood and his hair and saliva sample. He was, in fact, matched to the DNA from the sexual assault kit.
With Luis's statements, detectives can put together exactly what happened on the night Missy was murdered.
I believe he went there thinking he could convince her to have intercourse with him. His primary focus was to have sex with that young lady. Maybe initially he thought would be consensual, which it would never happen. So now he's mad at her, and then he took it to another level, physically abused her, sexually assaulted her, and then he killed her. After he killed Missy, he needed to destroy evidence, and that's when he made his decision to set fire to the apartment.
Lewis was charged with capital murder. Once we had the written statement, we had the statements from the wife. Pretty straightforward case.
As Luis awaits trial, detectives zero in on two former suspects in the case.
Charles Johnson was finally tracked down, and he was not even in the area at the time of the murder.
Jeffrey Smith was arrested and convicted of kidnapping his girlfriend, Kristen. He received a 4-year sentence. Luis Arroyo's trial lasts only 5 days.
We got a conviction rather quickly. And in Texas, once a person is convicted of capital murder with the death penalty waived, it's an automatic life sentence.
Although detectives have found their killer, the win is bittersweet.
He being in prison will never take away the pain, the horrific torture that child was put through. And him being in prison will never heal the wounds that the family has. They never recover. You can't bring Missy back. You just do what you got to do and make sure people pay for the crimes they commit.
Missy's mother is in a state of permanent grief. Missy's death did leave a very large void. Missy's life was taken way too soon, but it was a beautiful life. She was a beautiful soul, and she still is.
For more information on an unexpected killer, go to oxygen.com. A charming and spirited young mother.
Oh, she was so vivacious, like a little firecracker. She was sweet and loving, but she just didn't take any crap off anybody.
Is found strangled in her bedroom.
Whoever did this left her there with no chance to survive.
Police face a challenging crime scene.
There was no forensic evidence whatsoever. No fingerprints. No eyewitnesses.
This case was a definite whodunit case.
And a long list of suspects.
He had been hanging around her desk, and he had made some comments that really creeped her out.
She had had some troubled boyfriends in the past.
He didn't want to accept the fact that they were done. Their relationship was over.
You would think that whoever did it had a score to settle.
Until one big break reveals a culprit
That one key piece of evidence was the aha moment in the case.
And it shocks everyone.
When they finally discovered who it was just surreal.
There's no rhyme, there's no reason behind it. It was absolutely senseless.
Just before 5 p.m. on a Monday in March of 1999, in the small bedroom community of Norcross, Georgia, police raced through the suburban streets in response to a 911 call.
The only information that we had at hand initially was there had been a person discovered dead in an apartment. It was her fiance that had called 911. When we arrived at the scene, we spoke with the fiance briefly.
The man tells detectives the victim is 20-year-old mother of one, Danielle Jennings. Her 2-year-old son is currently at daycare.
The fiance told us he walked in and found her lying on the bed, and he stated that she was cold and blue.
She was deceased by that point. She was face down on the bed, and he rolled her over and then called 911.
While Danielle's fiance is taken to provide a statement, investigators take a close look at the crime scene.
When you went back into the bedroom, she was on the bed, fully clothed, laying on her back, but you could obviously see signs of strangulation.
She had a ligature around her neck. The ligature appeared to be some type of stocking, and it was tied around her neck very, very tight.
It had been tied off to leave it that way. It's not like it released, which I thought was pretty unusual. I mean, whoever did this left her there with no chance to survive.
The ligature was knotted in the back, which would tell you that the person was on her back, behind her, when she was strangled.
Detectives explore the rest of the crime scene, looking for clues.
The bed was messed up. One of the dresser drawers was open. The stocking that she was strangled with may have been one of hers out of that drawer. Her purse was dumped out as if somebody had dumped the contents and rummaged through it. It could have been a robbery or a burglary just gone wrong. However, there was other stuff such as cameras, miscellaneous jewelry that could have been taken, but they were not taken.
It was possibly a burglary that had been interrupted, but you always have to consider the possibility that it could have been a staged burglary because, frankly, there really wasn't a lot of disruption.
Next, investigators try to determine how the killer entered the apartment.
There was absolutely no tool marks or anything on the front door, and then there was a sliding patio glass door. It was locked. There was no evidence of tampering with it at all. We went around and we searched the outside, but we didn't turn up anything of any value.
Before they return to the station to interview Danielle's fiance, detectives fan out to speak with other tenants in the complex.
Most of the people in these complexes work during the day, and so most of them are not home. We left our business cards with a note asking them to please give us a call.
As the crime scene investigation continues, news of Danielle's violent murder quickly spreads to her family and friends.
When I found out that Danielle died, I said, no, you've got to be kidding me. I said, this cannot be real. And then I dropped the phone and I just started screaming. I was just absolutely in utter shock. How does one handle the information that your best friend, your sister, the person that you basically love more than anybody in this world is gone? Why would somebody do this to such a loving, caring, beautiful person?
Born in Columbia, South Carolina in 1978, Danielle grew up with her mother and stepfather in Stockton, Georgia. Even in her youth, Danielle had a magnetic personality.
She was beautiful, strong, tenacious, ferocious. She was very fun. Danielle was always ready to have a good time, to laugh.
Oh, she was so vivacious, like a little firecracker. She was very tiny, but she had this big attitude. She was sweet and loving, but she just didn't take any crap off anybody.
Danielle showed her resilience when she was left to deal with an unplanned pregnancy alone at the age of 16.
There was never a doubt in her mind that she wanted to have that baby. She wasn't scared. I mean, she had brass balls of steel.
She wasn't going to let her age stand in the way of being a good mother.
Danielle gave birth to her son, Tristan, in 1996.
She was so proud. I could see her little attitude in him.
The new mother longed for her son to have a father and hoped she had found one when she started dating Luis Payano.
We grew up with Luis, so we go way back with him. We met Luis in our early teen years. Danielle was always partial to Luis, and Luis and Danielle were dating, and I was so thrilled. And the way that Luis would look at Danielle, like she would walk into the room and he would just light up.
Soon, the couple moved into an apartment together, and Danielle landed an office job at a landscaping company.
She was so excited to have like what we titled a big girl job. She was very proud of herself. We were all very proud of her, you know? She was going places.
In December of 1998, Luis asked Danielle to marry him.
She was so excited, and I'm like, this is going to be the best marriage ever. When Danielle first got her engagement ring, it was too big. And I said, girl, you got to get it sized. She's like, I don't want to take it off. It was beautiful.
Danielle had everything going for her. She had a great career opportunity ahead of her. She had a man she was so excited to marry. She had a beautiful son that just meant the world to her. Danielle was really on top of her game.
She was probably the happiest I had ever seen her.
Now, all Danielle's happiness and hope has been stolen by a cold-blooded killer.
I could not even begin to fathom why somebody would do that to her.
Back at the crime scene, investigators are searching for answers.
The scene raised several questions. Of course, the most obvious was, how did whoever it was get into the apartment? Because there was no sign of forced entry. Was it someone she knew? We know, working off the percentages, that the person most likely to kill you is laying next to you in the bed. In this case, Danielle's fiancé, Luis.
Coming up, detectives unearth dark secrets.
She had had some troubled boyfriends in the past.
He was violent. He was abusive. You could tell when he talked about Danielle that it made him mad.
He was just very, very creepy to me. And I know they had tumultuous fights.
The person that did it could have been amongst us.
And just as the case threatens to turn cold,
we felt like we had hit a brick wall.
I had a huge fear that whoever it was got away with it.
A stunning revelation points to a killer no one suspected.
The killer was much closer to home than anybody first thought. I don't think anybody saw it coming.
Police investigating the murder of 20-year-old mother Danielle Jennings have their first suspect, her fiancé, 25-year-old Luis Payano.
Even though he's her fiancé, everybody remains a suspect until such time that we solve the crime.
Investigators question the distraught young man.
He was very emotional, but romance can raise anger to a level sometimes that leads to homicide.
Detectives begin their interview by asking Luis about Danielle's movements the day of her murder.
He stated that he had been at work all day. The last time he had seen Danielle was when he left to go to work.
According to Luis, they had both left the apartment at 6:45 a.m., but Danielle went back into the building to get something. He tells detectives that Danielle seemed distracted because of an upcoming work meeting.
She was supposed to be having a meeting with management that day. She didn't feel easy about it.
Luis says Danielle called him at work around 11:30 a.m.
She wanted to see if Luis would have lunch with her, but he was tied up at work and he couldn't break free.
They didn't have lunch, and later in the afternoon, he couldn't reach her.
He called her at work, and then they told him that she had gone home at lunchtime, but she didn't come back from lunch after a couple of hours.
Luis tells investigators he called Danielle's cell phone and their apartment.
He stated that he was trying to get hold of Danielle and was not getting a response, and then he left work and went home to see if she was there.
Luis said that when he got home, the front door was unlocked, and that really surprised him because they were pretty careful about keeping the front door locked.
Detectives ask Luis about his relationship with Danielle.
We wanted to find out if they had domestic issues. He said that it was a very good relationship and they were very much in love with each other.
To verify his story, detectives call Luis's work and Danielle's loved ones.
Her family and friends stated that they were just a young couple that were very much in love and looking forward to getting married and spending their life together.
She had had some troubled boyfriends in the past, but Lewis was on the up and up. I mean, he was setting up a financially stable life for him and Danielle and Tristan, and she loved him so much.
Danielle's friends are adamant that Luis would never harm her, and his alibi seems solid.
We were able to confirm that he had been at work all day through statements of his coworkers. As a result, he was eliminated as a suspect. Now you're on the hunt for other suspects.
With Luis in the clear, detectives ask him if he knew of anyone who may want to harm Danielle.
He brought up the name of Jeff, a co-worker of Danielle. She had filed a sexual harassment complaint against him at work. That piqued our interest a little bit. We immediately went to Danielle's place of work and we met with her supervisor and discussed what was going on.
Danielle's supervisor tells detectives about the young mother's harassment complaint against her coworker.
He was a middle-aged man. He worked at the same landscape company. He had a different job. He was in management. Danielle told her manager and supervisor he had been hanging around her desk and he had made some comments that really kind of creeped her out and acting inappropriately at work.
There was a big age difference between Danielle and Jeff. He was 40, she was 20. He had asked her out for lunch, and she told him that she had a fiance that she loved, and he had made a comment to her that if he was 20 years younger, things would be a lot different.
Danielle had briefly touched base with me about the situation that she was having at work. Dude was kind of crushing on her, and she was trying to get that, under control. But I said, just don't let it get out of hand.
She filed the complaint. I kind of admired her grit. She wasn't going to take it. The company was very responsive to her complaint. They took it seriously. They moved quickly.
Detectives note the timing when told of the company's response.
That day that Danielle was killed, she was supposed to be having a meeting with upper management about the sexual harassment charge.
Once we realized that the meeting had taken place that day, that was something that was suspicious.
Talking with the management, we found out Danielle was anxious and nervous about the meeting.
She was a relatively new employee when she made the complaint. That was one of the reasons she was so nervous, because his career was in a certain amount of jeopardy.
Coworkers state that after the meeting, Danielle went home for lunch, but never returned.
She didn't come back, and we knew that was consistent with the time of death. You had to think Where was the coworker at the time?
Detective suspicions increase when they learn that Jeff was out of the office and did not return until late in the day. Was this too much of a coincidence? Could he have killed Danielle as revenge for her complaint?
We definitely wanted to speak with him face to face.
Detectives hunting the killer of Danielle Jennings suspect a harassment complaint against her coworker, Jeff, may have led to retaliation and murder.
We were now focused on him as a possible suspect. We had to consider the possibility that he followed her home and ambushed her and killed her.
Investigators bring the 40-year-old in for an interview and ask about his interaction with 20-year-old Danielle.
He admitted to asking her out for lunch, but he said other than that, he had not done anything.
He talked about the sexual harassment complaint and pretty typically said, I didn't think it was that big a deal. I didn't know she was that offended.
According to police reports, Jeff denies any sexual intentions toward Danielle.
He told police that whatever lapse in manners that he had had with Danielle, that he liked her. He seemed to be genuinely dismayed to find out what had happened.
Detectives ask if Danielle's complaint gave him a reason to want to harm her.
His first reaction was he was angry. He was adamant that he was not a suspect. And then he said it couldn't have been me because my truck was broken and I was on a job with somebody else, with a coworker. And I can prove it.
Jeff provides investigators with the name of the coworker he claims to have been with.
We immediately ran down his coworker at like 1 o'clock in the morning. This guy verified that he was with him all day till the close of business. They were together.
With his alibi confirmed, police eliminate Jeff as a suspect. 24 hours after Danielle's murder, the enormity of her death is only just starting to hit home for Danielle's loved ones.
Things like that didn't happen where we grew up. I could not believe somebody would do that to her. It was just the most nightmarish thing I could imagine. It made me question God. Why would you let something that horrible happen to her?
I didn't want to accept it. I couldn't sleep. I just kept saying, she's dead, she's dead. Danielle should not be dead.
The following day, investigators receive the autopsy report and scour it for anything that might point to Danielle's killer.
The manner of death was asphyxiation or strangulation.
The medical examiner stated that she probably lost consciousness within about 15 to 20 seconds after the ligature was placed around her neck.
It seemed clear that she had been surprised by her attacker, had no time to move, had no time to strike back.
It's almost like it came out of nowhere. We knew from the positioning of the knot, someone had come up behind her with the nylon stocking, pulled it tight until she lost consciousness, and then tied it off to kill her. She had not been sexually assaulted. There weren't any other injuries. There weren't any defensive injuries.
This case was a definite whodunit case. There was no evidence found at the scene that could help us.
There was no forensic evidence whatsoever. No transfer of skin, no fingerprints, nothing a lab could look at.
After striking out with the autopsy, investigators revisit the theory that the homicide was a robbery gone wrong.
We don't live there, so we don't know what's supposed to be there and what's not. We asked the fiancé to go back through the apartment with us and tell us what he sees missing. The smallest detail sometimes helps point us into the direction of a suspect, but nothing was missing according to the fiancé. At that point, we had absolutely nothing to go on, other than the stocking that she was strangled with.
Detectives ask Luis if he recognizes the stalking.
We wanted to know whether it came from her. It was a tan, knee-high women's stocking, and he said that she never wore anything like that, and we didn't find any in the apartment. Whoever did this brought that with them.
The homicide was brutal, violent, and vicious. It lent itself to a personal motive. You would think that whoever did it had a score to settle.
Louise told us she had had some tumultuous relationships in her past, so we pursued that angle.
Investigators asked Danielle's friends about her previous relationships.
When they first started questioning me, they were asking me a lot of questions about her boyfriends in the past, who I felt might have been able to do it. And then it clicked that, Eddie, he was a tow truck driver, and he was a big guy. And he was just very, very creepy to me.
Her best friend told us about her ex-boyfriend. He was violent. He was abusive.
She ended up having to get a restraining order on him. But with Eddie, no one ever really knew when he was going to pop up again.
That was somebody we needed to look at.
Two days after the murder of 20-year-old Danielle Jennings, friends have alerted investigators to Eddie McElwaney, an ex-boyfriend with a violent history.
We learned a lot about her former boyfriend. We learned that she had begun to see him when she was a teenager, when she was younger.
Friends reveal Danielle started dating Eddie shortly after she became pregnant from another relationship. But Eddie's behavior soon raised red flags.
As they got more serious, he became more possessive and controlling, and he definitely wanted to start isolating her from her friends and family more.
I didn't want to be around him. I did not like the way he made me feel. I didn't like the way he looked at Danielle. I mean, he would sometimes look at her with disgust. And I know they had tumultuous fights.
We learned it had been an abusive relationship, physical and emotional.
I mean, she would stand up to anybody, but as tough and as a badass as she was, I think she was a little bit afraid of him.
Things only got worse with Eddie when Danielle gave birth to her child.
Her family and friends stated that shortly after her son was born, Eddie was getting involved in drugs, and that was finally the straw that broke the camel's back, and she ended the relationship with that.
Danielle moved out and tried to start fresh, but Eddie had other plans.
She knew it was going to be difficult, but she didn't realize that Eddie was not going to leave Danielle in peace. He didn't want to accept the fact that they were done, their relationship was over. She never knew when he would turn up around the corner, when she just wanted to be left alone.
She had gotten a restraining order against Eddie because he had been stalking her. He had been driving back and forth in front of her house. He had gone to her work, and she was in fear that she was in danger.
We found out that he had violated the restraining order several times. He would call her, leave voicemails for her. He would drive by her house several times a day or night.
When police ask when Eddie last contacted Danielle, the answer is troubling.
Danielle's family had told us that within the last few months he had been calling her, trying to get her to talk to him, but she would just hang up on him.
Could Eddie have shown up at Danielle's apartment the day she was killed, leading to a deadly confrontation?
I've seen a lot of domestic abuse cases, so I knew that there was a possibility that with his past that he could have done something like that.
Investigators track down Eddie and bring him in for questioning.
In the interview with Eddie, he was kind of belligerent and unhappy to be there and a little bit hostile. You could tell when he talked about Danielle that it made him mad. What we saw with Eddie certainly had all the earmarks of a domestic violence case.
When questioned about his relationship with Danielle, Eddie's responses raised detectives' suspicions even more.
When he was asked about the relationship, his version was a little bit different. He never mentioned any abuse. He thought everything was great.
We asked him when was the last time that he had had any contact with Danielle, and he said that he had not talked to her for at least a year or longer. We know that he's lying about that from speaking with Danielle's family and friends. We knew in the last several months he had been calling her.
At that point, he's looking pretty good. So you have to determine where he was at the time of the crime.
Eddie tells detectives that he was working many miles away from where Danielle was killed.
He said that on his job as a tow truck driver that he had to go out of state.
Investigators immediately look into Eddie's alibi.
His boss verified that he was out of state, and he was able to produce hotel receipts, gas receipts that showed that he was actually out of state at the time of the crime.
Whenever he responded to a legitimate call, he had to log it, and his whereabouts could be verified throughout the day.
That is a pretty tight alibi, so he was eliminated as a suspect.
It's another dead end for detectives.
Once again, we're knocked for a loop, and we're back to ground zero, and he moves down the line, and we're looking for somebody else.
It was infuriating. It was frustrating. I had a huge fear that whoever it was got away with it, because people get away with murder every day. I was really hoping that the detectives would find something, because you're sitting here trying to point a finger at somebody that you don't know who.
There was this air of suspense around everything because we didn't know at that time who had killed Danielle. The person that did it could have been amongst us.
We had basically eliminated everybody who was close to the victim. When you get to that point of an investigation, you don't have anywhere else to logically follow up.
With no more leads, the investigation is at a standstill.
We felt like we had hit a brick wall, and then we got a call that changed everything.
Three days after finding Danielle Jennings strangled in her apartment bedroom, police hunting her killer have just got a stunning new lead.
We received a phone call from a Miss Kirk that resided at the apartment complex.
The woman tells detectives about a disturbing incident that took place a week before Danielle was killed.
She was awakened one morning by someone knocking at the door, and she looked out the peephole but didn't see anybody there, so she went back to bed. And a few minutes later, she hears the front door open, and the maintenance man is standing there. The maintenance man says that he's there for a work order. However, Miss Kirk says she felt very uncomfortable the entire time that he was in there because he was always staring at her, like he was more preoccupied with her than he was completing the work order.
The woman cannot provide the name of the maintenance man, but she gives a description to police. Detectives head back to Danielle's apartment complex to investigate.
While speaking with the management at the complex, we found that there was another case similar in the past from a Miss Bruno that lived in the apartment complex.
Management told the detectives that someone had walked into this woman's apartment. She had, of course, asked him who the heck he was. What are you doing in my apartment? And he said maintenance, and claimed that he was there to change light bulbs. And she said, I don't have any light bulbs to change. He kind of mumbled and stumbled, and then, maybe I have the wrong apartment, and he backed out and left. It was so similar to the other one, which of course raises our eyebrows.
The complex was big enough so that there were several maintenance workers, but only one closely fit the description given by the young ladies. That would be Calvin Oliver.
We showed a photograph of Mr. Oliver to Miss Bruno and Miss Kirk, and both of them identified him as the person that had walked in on them.
Investigators discover a disturbing trend emerged after Calvin had been hired 7 months ago.
Come to find out, there had been several burglaries reported where items had been stolen out of apartments that had no forced entry.
Could Calvin have been responsible for these thefts?
We learned that he had an apartment in the complex. The fact that he lives there makes it so accessible that he could walk around, not be suspicious. We also learned that the custodians had access to the master keys of every apartment. He has complete access.
Detectives search for any link between Danielle and Calvin.
We found out that he had done a work order in her apartment a couple of weeks prior to the murder.
That is somebody that you really want to look at. It went back to our original theory of if this was a burglary, then it had been interrupted. He could have known that Danielle Jennings was gone during the daytime, and he decided that day that he was going to enter that apartment.
Investigators haul Calvin Oliver in for an interview, but make the call to slow play their suspicions.
When Oliver was brought in for questioning, we didn't want to tip him off to anything about the homicide. So he was interviewed initially about the burglaries. He absolutely denied any of that. He said, I didn't steal anything, I didn't go into apartments. He denied any involvement in any burglaries.
The 42-year-old tells detectives that his intrusion on the two women in the complex was a simple misunderstanding.
Once we got around to interviewing him about the murder, the first question was, did you hear about this? It was kind of odd. You would have thought that a person who worked in that apartment complex and was there every day would have heard everything about it. He went, yeah, I think I heard something about it. I don't know much about it. I don't know that woman.
He insisted he knew nothing about, as he described her, that dead girl.
All he admitted to knowing her was that he had done the work order in her apartment.
At that point, we had a pattern of conduct going into apartments. We had the admission that he had been in the apartment, but we had nothing that directly linked him to the murder.
With nothing concrete on Calvin, detectives end the interview. But before they let him walk free, police run a background check and are shocked by what they find.
He had a criminal history of burglary and theft. There was an outstanding warrant on him for failure to appear on a burglary charge in another jurisdiction. That day that Danielle was killed, if he's in there and she walks in on him, that would be a reason for him to cause her harm because he doesn't want to go back to prison.
He had an outstanding warrant, so he was held for that, and that bought them enough time while they investigated.
Based on the burglaries that had occurred in the complex, we obtained a search warrant for his apartment. We're trying to see if we can find anything that would tie him to Danielle Jennings. We're looking for any type of the stockings or pantyhose or anything that would be similar to the one that we found tied around her neck.
Detectives find no matching stocking, but they do discover incriminating evidence.
We do find evidence of the other burglaries that had been committed in the complex. And then we also found out that he had possession of a master key for the apartment complex so that he could open any door on any building at any time, and he was not supposed to be in possession of that key.
It's only enough evidence to allow investigators to charge Calvin with burglary.
We concluded that search with those items, but nothing was found relevant to the murder. You really don't have anywhere else to go at that point.
We don't have a stocking. We don't have anything that ties him to Danielle or her apartment at all.
That's where we were until Luis called. Out of the blue, he said, "Do you have the engagement ring?"
We told him, no, we don't have a ring. We didn't know one was missing. And then he describes the ring, and then the big bright light goes off. When we were doing the search on Oliver's apartment, we noticed a ring on a dresser in his bedroom, but the ring didn't match any of the items stolen, so we really didn't have a reason to seize it at that time. We do another search warrant, go back into the apartment, we seize that ring, we show it to the fiance. He can't positively identify the ring, but he says her best friend will definitely be able to identify it. If we were able to identify that as being Danielle's ring, that would physically tie Oliver to Danielle and her apartment on the day that she was murdered.
With the entire investigation on the line, detectives race to the home of Danielle's best friend.
Is that ring the engagement ring? This is something we gotta know.
Investigators believe the key to solving the murder of Danielle Jennings is her missing engagement ring.
If we had that ring, then we had the killer.
Detectives have seized a ring from suspect Calvin Oliver's apartment. But is it Danielle's engagement ring? They hope her best friend can answer that question.
The detective and Lewis were there, and I said, well, what's going on? And the detective looked at me and he said, Leslie, he said, do you know what Danielle's engagement ring looked like? And I said, yes, sir, I do. The detective said, is there any defining characteristics to this ring? He goes, and I need you to be specific. And I said, yes, sir. I said it was bent. She had bent the band so it stayed snug on her finger because she wouldn't take the dang thing to get sized.
We needed to find out when was the last time she had seen her wearing the ring.
I said, I saw Danielle the Sunday before she was killed, and she had her ring on Sunday night. And he takes the evidence bag out and he says, is this her ring? And the minute I saw it, I knew it was hers.
When we had that ring and had it identified as being hers, we knew that we had the guy. We knew we had the right person.
Finding the ring was the aha moment in the case. And that was the piece of evidence that allowed us to charge Calvin Oliver with murder.
9 days after her death, Calvin Oliver is arrested for the murder of Danielle Jennings.
The primary charge was malice murder, and that means that you intentionally and unlawfully kill another human being.
Detectives once again interview Calvin, this time taking a different approach.
Once you have a suspect under arrest for the charge that you're interviewing him about, then the interview becomes very direct. He was given a chance again to tell the story where he denied any involvement in the murder, and then he was confronted with the evidence that we had.
We told him about the ring, and that's when he said, well, I stole that ring 2 weeks ago when I did the work order in her apartment. But see, we knew that was a lie because we had people that had seen her wearing the ring, so we knew that he was lying about that.
Calvin refuses to answer any more questions.
We told him that he was being charged with malice murder because you took the pantyhose with you into the apartment because you had intent to harm someone, and he said there was no intent there, which was a good comment to have in a statement. It's like he admitted to killing her without knowing that he had admitted to it. We were convinced 100% that we had our guy. This is the guy that was responsible for the death of Danielle Jennings, and that we were going to send him to prison for the rest of his life.
News of an arrest in Danielle's murder brings relief to her loved ones and surprise.
When they finally discovered who it was, the maintenance man in her apartment building, it was just surreal.
I don't think anybody saw it coming. The killer was much closer to home than anybody first thought.
When I saw his picture, I threw up, knowing that was the man that strangled my best friend for no reason.
At trial, prosecutors present how they believe the crime unfolded.
The day Danielle was killed, Mr. Oliver had already let himself in, hoping for financial gain. After the HR meeting about her coworker, Danielle went home for lunch by herself. Once she opened the door and stepped in, he knew she was there, and he knew she could not exit again. He was not going to get caught.
He ambushed her from behind with the stocking. He came over her head. He pulled it tight, pushed her down onto the bed until she lost consciousness, and then he tied the ligature off, and there was no way for her to escape. There was no heat of the moment. There was no emotion. He killed Danielle because it made his life easier.
The jury hears about the prosecution's most damning evidence, Danielle's stolen engagement ring.
I had to be the one to testify about the ring because I identified the ring. I actually had to look at that man. I had to sit there and look at him. Calvin Oliver sat there just staring daggers into me, is what he did, and tried everything he could to make me feel uncomfortable. And I took a big, deep breath, and I stared right back at him.
There was no explanation for the presence of this ring in Calvin Oliver's apartment, other than he took it off Danielle Jennings' dead finger.
On October 13th, 2000, after a 5-day trial, the jury delivers their verdict.
He was found guilty on all charges.
The judge sentences Calvin Oliver to life in prison.
When the verdict came through, we were all holding hands. We just knew justice had been served as far as it could be. I mean, we were glad, but it still wasn't going to bring her back. Her mom was never the same again. It destroyed her. That horrible man took away an angel that was put here. She was a huge light to me, to her fiance, to her son. She was everything to a lot of people. To this day, I still dream of her. There's not a day that goes by that I don't miss her.
A good-natured, fun-loving man.
He was just a wonderful person. He was so funny and so charming.
Enjoying his retirement years.
At that point in his life, he was very content. He was very close to his family, his nieces and nephews.
Is brutally gunned down a month before his wedding.
It was point-blank assassination.
There's a big puddle of blood. Oh, my God!
Investigators pieced together a series of clues.
We had to look at what role that upcoming wedding had and what happened.
They'd have their arguments. They had their differences.
Was the scene staged to cover up an intentional killing? The investigation kept hitting dead end after dead end.
And chased down multiple suspects.
It was a whodunit. We were hoping for that break to come.
Revealing a plot fueled by greed.
He was somebody who had a criminal history of theft and assault.
Just when police are close to making an arrest,
it was like he had just got smacked in the head with a baseball bat.
They uncovered damning evidence pointing to a surprising suspect.
You never expect anything like this.
And then all of a sudden the kill was right in front of us.
On a warm July afternoon in 2014, the sleepy Pittsburgh suburb of Kennedy Township is rocked by a panicked call to 911.
Okay, now what's going on?
I just come home from work, and my husband, he's been on the ground. He's dead. There's a big puddle of blood.
Police, fire, and ambulance are coming, okay?
Oh, please help me. Oh, my God.
woman who made the 911 call, Carol Lapaya, says the victim is her soon-to-be husband, 59-year-old Jack Parks.
When I arrived on scene, the first thing I noticed is that the victim's head was covered in blood. It was on closer examination that you could see it was a gunshot wound. One challenge we had right out of the gate was that there was no casing or gun found. We don't move his body until it can be photographed. It was possible there was a gun underneath him that no one had seen, so we weren't 100% sure if the gunshot wound at that point had been self-inflicted or homicide. We looked for a while. Unfortunately, we didn't find any type of gun.
Detectives searched for any signs of what happened to Jack and who pulled the trigger.
It was pretty clear right off the bat that this was some type of a home invasion or robbery that occurred.
It didn't look like a struggle had ensued in the room, but once you walked through the victim's house, the further you got into it, the more you realized the level of disarray it was in. And as you went into the dining room, you started to see jewelry box here, a drawer gone through here, papers rifled through. Upstairs, there was just complete disarray. The drawers were all pulled out. The clothing that was inside the drawers was strewn everywhere. Jewelry boxes flipped open, empty watch boxes laying there.
We were trying to determine, was the scene staged? Was someone just trying to make it look like a robbery or a burglary, and when in fact they're just trying to cover up an intentional killing where they intended just to walk in and execute somebody? The house was dusted and processed for DNA and fingerprints. We then began to process the outside of the residence, looking for any type of forced entry, and none of that was found.
Our first thoughts were the victim either knew the actor or was familiar with him. That's just our first impression. So, who was friends with the victim, who would have access to the victim, who would have opportunity to the victim, and who would he trust?
It really was a shocking case. He was killed execution style. This homicide happened in an area that we don't normally have murders.
Jack's death is the first homicide in Kennedy Township in 10 years. The news stuns his family and friends.
When I got that phone call and I heard Carol's voice, I knew something was wrong. And she said, "Jack's gone." I said, "What do you mean, gone?" She said, "He's dead." And then she said he was murdered. And I just went into shock.
Jack Parks was born the second of 5 kids in Pittsburgh in 1955. Friends and family were everything to him.
Jack always made friends. He was one of the best people I've ever known. He would do anything for anybody. We first met in 1st grade. We hit it off all through high school. And after that, it was a good ride.
Jack was so well liked. He could be charming when he wanted to and funny. He was just a wonderful person.
In 1989, a chance encounter changed Jack's life.
Jack met Carol at the local bar, and I guess they hit it off.
They were 2 peas in a pod. Since he brought Carol, we fell in love with Carol.
Jack was very close to his family. He had about 9 nieces and nephews.
Jack and Carol used to have their nieces and nephews over for sleepovers, making the popcorn and just having a good time. You'd have swore that Jack and Carol were the parents. They didn't have kids, so when those kids were around, they were their kids.
Jack had recently retired, but had big plans for the future.
At that point in his life, Jack was very content. Him and Carol were going to get married.
They've been together for over 25 years. Carol in the beginning really wanted to get married, and Jack didn't. And then at one point, Jack wanted to get married and Carol didn't. And I used to tell Jack, you know what, I like to be living when you get married, when you say I do. And then when they set the date, I was so happy. It was going to be an exciting, very exciting day.
Tragically, Jack was murdered a month before the ceremony was to take place.
Her and Jack were going to be married on August 31st of that year, and it was really sad. It was so close.
At 5 p.m. on July 21st, 2 hours after Carol found Jack dead, police questioned her at the station.
Talking to Carol was so important because, first of all, we had to determine whether she was or wasn't involved, and we wanted to just get the best timeline from her. During the interview with Carol, she explained that she had left for work as usual, her normal time, about 5:40. She starts work at 6. Everything was fine when she left for work. It wasn't until a realtor called her about a potential buyer for Jack's late mother's home. And when the realtor couldn't get a hold of Jack, Carol started to worry. She tried to call Jack and there was no answer.
So then she got concerned. He always called her back every time that she tried to get a hold of him. So I think it was approximately about 2 o'clock she left work and then come over and find Jack, of course.
Detectives know that spouses are always the first suspect and must determine if they can trust Carol's version of events.
We have a timeline between 6 a.m. to 3 p.m. when she returns home. In some cases, you know, if a person's a cold-blooded killer, they may have killed him before she left the house, and then all of a sudden she finds him and, you know, and the killer's right in front of us.
Her demeanor, she was very upset, but you can't take a chance by skipping a stone and not trying to look at her.
Detectives are suspicious of why it took the couple so long to decide to get married, and if someone had cold feet.
Something that we thought is, are either one of them having affairs with someone else? Could that be a possible motivation, and is this upcoming wedding triggering that?
Coming up, detectives uncover a family feud.
They just decided to distance themselves and not let him come to the house.
And learn Jack's inner circle isn't as loving and devoted as it first seems.
Things got more contentious.
As police keep digging, more suspects surface.
We learned of several burglaries.
They had concerns about the employees. They hire criminals.
Just when the investigation is about to hit another dead end.
We had no idea who would have done this.
Detectives make a crucial discovery.
It was exactly what we needed.
When we got the phone records back, it was, oh my God.
That was an aha moment.
Kennedy Township Police are investigating the area's first homicide in a decade. 59-year-old Jack Parks was found dead in his home by his fiancée Carol in what appears to be a robbery. But since there was no forced entry, investigators try to determine if this was actually a staged attack, and if the motive was something more personal.
When we interviewed Carol, we had to look at what role, if any, that upcoming wedding had in what happened. We had to start looking at every aspect of their lifestyle. What were the family dynamics? We had to chip away at a number of things in their life. Things that happened that day, but also things that might have happened in the past that could be a motivation for this murder.
They had their differences. They'd have their arguments. But it wasn't my point to get involved in their squabbles.
We kept talking more and more about any kind of problems that they had had in their home. And I asked her, do either of them have a gun? And she said that they did not.
Carol says she would never do anything to hurt the love of her life. She wanted to marry him. Jack was her soulmate.
Jack and Carol, they loved each other. They felt they were already married. To everybody, they were husband and wife years before, the wedding was planned.
Carol was very upset. It was very difficult to talk to her while she processed that emotion, but then to still get the information we needed to keep moving the investigation forward. To me, that was a sign that she wasn't involved.
With suspicion shifting from Carol for now, investigators explore whether theft was the main motive.
The bedroom was ransacked. The mattress was disturbed. Things were emptied out of drawers.
Carol had indicated to me some items that should be there. Their wedding rings that they had bought. Jack collected some coins. He had some expensive watches. She indicated that the watches should be in the boxes. When we first processed the areas of disarray, none of those items were there. That was our first big clue to go off of. I knew that if we could find that jewelry, we could find who was involved. We didn't know if the person who took it might have given it to someone else, but we had to start with where is it, who has it, and how did they get it.
The next morning, the autopsy report comes in.
He was taken out with one shot and to the right side of his head. It took it to a level where you know that is someone who probably came there with the intent to either use that weapon to intimidate or control Jack. There was a projectile that was recovered from his skull, and we were able to determine that we were looking for this .380.
So that was a good start for us. Now we knew what kind of gun we were looking for.
During the victim's autopsy, you could see that there were no wounds on his hands at all. There were no scratches. There were no broken fingernails. Nothing that seemed to indicate that he had had a chance to fight back. He had been caught completely off guard.
During Carol's interview, she indicated to police that Jack's nephew, Bradley Johnson, is someone they should look into.
Bradley was living across the street with his mother and father, across the street from Jack. And he was always over there. And from what I understand, he was one of the last ones to see Jack alive.
We made contact with Bradley, and Bradley had told us that he had gone over to Jack's house on the 21st, and he said he got there around 10:30 in the morning.
Detectives find that timing suspicious. They know Jack was killed sometime between 6 a.m. and 3 p.m. that day.
I asked him, I said, Bradley, what did you go over there to talk to him about? And he said, well, Jack's mother had passed away, and he knew that Jack was looking to sell the home. But Bradley wanted to negotiate a deal with Jack, and he wanted to talk to Jack alone because he said, I don't want Carol weighing in on this. I want this to be a Parks family matter, and I want to discuss it with him. In his words, I didn't want her putting her 2 cents in. And that was a phrase that seemed to hint at some kind of animosity.
Bradley tells investigators that he finds Carol too controlling and that she shouldn't have a say in this family decision.
Jack wanted to wait until he could talk with Carol about it, which sort of defeated the purpose of why Bradley had gone there when she wasn't home. So he said he ended up leaving and they were going to revisit the conversation later.
As investigators press him further, Bradley reveals an alarming fact.
We did ask him about any firearms that he owned, and when Bradley told us he owned a .380 caliber pistol, it kind of was like, okay, this may be something broke bad, because now we know Carol leaves for work at 6 a.m. and Jack's alive at 10:30 because Brad's telling us he's over there.
He indicated he had left about 11:15. With Bradley's timeline, it definitely seemed that Bradley was very close in time to when Jack would have been killed. And he put himself there. He had the same type of gun.
Had the discussion about Jack's mother's house turned fatal?
With the timing of Bradley's conversation with Jack, it made me wonder whether things got more contentious than he was alluding to in my interview with him, or did he leave there upset, or did somebody else come back and do something to Jack? It had to be looked into.
"12 hours after Jack Parks was found dead, investigators chased down leads around their latest person of interest, Jack's nephew, Bradley Johnson.
When I found out that Bradley was a suspect, I was mad. I was really upset knowing that they thought that, but then again, when it comes to an investigation, the police are doing their job.
Bradley and Jack had a disagreement, and he admits to owning the same caliber gun.
So that definitely stepped up our interest in Bradley. This is a gun that we needed to take a look at.
Bradley's gun was collected, taken to the lab where it was test fired. The ballistics on the gun did not match the projectile that was recovered from Jack during the autopsy.
With nothing concrete linking Bradley to the murder, he is dropped as a suspect. Detectives also corroborate Carol's alibi.
On the day that this happened, we were able to verify that she was at work and she was accounted for at that time. We were able to eliminate Carol as the suspect.
Looking for new leads, detectives speak to the other nieces and nephews who were close to Jack.
During our interview of Carol, she had told us about her nephew, Michael LaPella, who was almost like a son to her, and he had been at the house a lot.
They got along good. Michael joined the military. Jack was very proud of Michael. Jack took pride in the nieces and nephews because he watched them grow up.
Michael was brought in to the homicide office and interviewed about Jack's murder. And during that interview, Michael had said that he was unemployed. He was trying to seek help through the VA hospital due to his PTSD from being in the Army. Michael had been discharged from the military due to his use of cannabis.
Michael also admits he'd fallen out with the family, including his aunt and uncle, and hadn't seen them in a year.
He specifically denied being over near the victim's house, and he made reference to them being estranged. Michael had a bit of a drug problem, and Carol and Jack decided to distance themselves from Michael and not let him come to the house.
Detectives still need to know where Michael was when Jack was killed.
We knew Carol left around 6 a.m. We knew that Bradley was there about 10:30. We knew Carol found him around 3 o'clock. So there's a window of opportunity of about 4 hours. He told us he was at home in Sharpsburg on the day of the incident, July 21st, 20 minutes away from Jack's house.
He said that his girlfriend had kind of unexpectedly taken the day off and they spent the day together. Nothing out of the ordinary. He gave us some landmarks on our timeline that we could check out. Michael and his girlfriend Melanie had gone and done some shopping in the town that they lived in. He said that he had had a doctor's appointment at the VA hospital later that afternoon. These were things at businesses and locations that we could check from doing surveillance video or getting sales transactions. Michael's girlfriend Melanie did corroborate his activities, and she stated they had spent the day together.
It was determined that his alibi had checked out.
A day into the investigation, with Jack's closest circle cleared, investigators escalate the search for the missing jewelry.
We were physically going to many pawn shops to try to see if anybody had sold this jewelry. We didn't get any traction with that.
That's when we started doing a canvass of the neighborhood.
When we were doing our neighborhood canvass, so many people had mentioned near their house there's a meat factory, and they had concerns about the employees. We had heard things like they hire people with records, they hire criminals. From talking to Carol, she said they have a straight view into Carol and Jack's home, and Jack had mentioned sometimes he would let people use his phone or use the bathroom when they were on their break, and it upset her.
In a case like this, you may see, hey, look at this guy, he got some gold on. It's a crime of opportunity.
We knew that they got their morning break right around the time when people stopped hearing from Jack, so we definitely wanted to look into that and see what the consensus was over there.
I think we did like almost 40 interviews of all the employees to see who they were.
One worker in particular piques police interest.
Ronald Evans was a name that came up from multiple employees in the context of people who had gone over to Jack's. This may be the person that Carol was aware that had come over there. Ronald Blevins was somebody who had had a criminal history of petty theft and assault, so he was on our radar for sure.
Investigators worked quickly to bring Ronald in for an interview.
Ronald indicated that he had known Jack and they were actually friendly, and that's why he was allowed to come into the house when Carol wasn't home. Carol said she would get upset with Jack. She would say, "Jack, don't just let anyone in our house. You can't do that." And he would just, kind of shrug it off. But she just didn't want people coming into the house that she didn't know.
Investigators asked Ronald point blank if he had anything to do with Jack's murder.
He said he had no involvement in Jack's death. The day that Jack was killed, Ronald didn't come to work. He had actually taken scheduled vacation for Friday and Monday. Ronald Blevins' alibi checked out, and we were able to eliminate him as a suspect in this case.
Desperate for a new lead, investigators look for similarities with other robberies in the area.
After Jack's murder, we talked to the local authorities, and during that we learned of several burglaries, one of which an older lady was burglarized and about $5,000 worth of quarters were taken.
Jack's killer had stolen his coins as well as jewelry. Is this the same person? And could they strike again?
The neighbors were very afraid. We still have a killer out there.
It was a whodunit. Once something like this happened, you think that anything's possible now.
Police investigating the cold-blooded shooting of Jack Parks suspect his murder could be linked to another recent robbery in the neighborhood.
We learned that during that burglary, there were some items similar to what Jack had that were taken, and it was a burglary that happened during the day, which is the timeline we were looking at in this particular incident. Oftentimes in our investigations, we see that residential burglaries are done during the day in bedroom communities where the chance of the people inside the home being at work are better, and that way they can go in and they can take what they need without fear of being caught.
With Jack being retired and home all day, had he caught the burglar red-handed and paid the ultimate price? The neighboring police department already has a suspect in custody.
Vernon Zielinski was identified as a possible suspect in this case. He had been recently arrested.
The items that Vernon was accused of taking were coins, while Jack had coins that were missing. So Vernon Zielinski was tracked down and he was interviewed. We really just wanted to do an interview and determine what connection, if any, he had to Jack. During the interview, he said that he had been arrested for the burglary, but that burglary was at an old employer's house. He denied knowing Jack, and he said that the day that this happened, he was actually at work.
We confirmed that through his new employer, that he was working that day, during the time frame that this would have occurred.
Vernon was somebody we were absolutely able to rule out of being directly involved. At that stage in the investigation, we had no idea who might have done this and why.
48 hours after Jack's murder, with no arrests in the case, fear is growing in Kennedy Township.
Everyone was concerned that how in broad daylight can someone walk into a house, kill somebody, and walk out without even being seen.
The hardest thing to comprehend was the murder. It was point-blank assassination. Stone cold killing. You never expect anything like this. I know I didn't.
Waiting for an arrest. You're still in that daze of trying to process it all. He's not coming back. It's just too unbelievable. Is this going to be another murder unsolved?
We had a lot of information to go on, and we were constantly moving the investigation forward. People were being eliminated, further suspects were being developed.
3 days after Jack was discovered dead, police get a major break.
A local pawn shop in Sharpsburg PA, which is another small little borough within Allegheny County. The owner had called the local police due to some suspicious activity. On the day of the incident, July 21st, he said a gentleman came in with a cachet of gold and was trying to sell it to him.
What the employee found to be concerning was, first of all, the jewelry was manipulated. It was very distinguishable pieces, but they had been, it seemed to be hammered or just manipulated in a way that would make them hard for law enforcement to identify. It threw up a red flag to him, but also he seemed to think that this was a person who had sold him stolen jewelry in the past. So he didn't buy the jewelry, but he also had the foresight to know he wanted to see where this jewelry might have come from. He knew it was important to get a picture of it. So he took a photograph of the items that this person was trying to sell.
He provided us with the photographs, and they were taken to Carol, who viewed them.
She became very upset. She started crying, and she said, "That's our jewelry."
It felt like we were closing in. Based upon the photograph of the jewelry, we were able to get that out to the local department. They could share it with the pawn shop owners in town if anyone comes in with this.
Investigators hope they can identify the seller.
The pawn shop owner was able to give a good description of the person who brought the jewelry in. A younger white male, black hair, and thin build. That description was provided to the local police chief in Sharpsburg, and he thought that fit the description of the white male from that area. It gave us a very good lead in this case. A photo array was put together to include 8 individual photographs, and they were shown to the shop owner.
We have a set of instructions that we give them, and we say, the person that we're looking for may or may not be in here, but if you see the person indicated on the lineup. So once he reviewed the photo array, he did identify who that person was. It was a huge break. It was exactly what we needed.
Coming up, police find stunning evidence pointing to Jack's killer.
In the video, we knew exactly who it was.
This was a shock to everyone.
You never thought that would happen. It would be that person.
But making an arrest wouldn't be easy.
She provided alibis for him and just denials.
Until investigators find proof no one can deny.
Those records don't lie.
Detectives have just identified the man who tried to pawn murder victim Jack Park's jewelry. His name? Brian Gibbons.
He's been a known thief to the local police department. We went after that lead strong.
We were feeling pretty confident that Mr. Gibbons may be our man, or at least know who our man was. We were very excited and very motivated to go find him.
Brian has a long history of petty crimes, but investigators need to determine if he's a killer. 4 days after the murder, they get a warrant to search his home.
Specifically, we were looking for any of the very distinguishing items that Jack Parks had. Unfortunately, we didn't find any of the victim's jewelry in the house, but we did find some items that did turn out to be stolen from someone else.
Based upon the search at Mr. Gibbons' residence, we were able to arrest him and have him sent to the county jail.
Investigators question Brian about Jack's missing jewelry.
He said that he didn't have anything to do with it. At that point, we were trying to determine if perhaps he'd been given some jewelry to sell, that maybe he didn't know its origin and he went to go sell it. We really just wanted to see if we could come up with any connection to rule him either in or out on the homicide of Jack Parks.
Brian tells detectives he doesn't know the victim and has never been to his home.
He said he had no connection to Jack at all. He denied having any knowledge of the Jack Parks homicide. We asked, well, what's your alibi? And he goes, I was arrested for entering an abandoned house that day. And that was confirmed. Brian was not the killer. He had a solid alibi.
It was clear that he was not the same individual who had come in to the store on that Monday and tried to sell the jewelry.
The pawn shop owner mistakenly identified the wrong person.
The investigation kept hitting dead end after dead end.
We thought we had it, but then once we eliminated him, we took a pause. We had to step back a minute, not start all over, but then keep everything else in perspective.
While detectives hunt for new leads, Jack's loved ones struggle with their grief. Instead of looking forward to Jack's wedding, 5 days after his murder, they attend his funeral.
When he told me he was going to get married, his brother and I would have stood up for him. I was proud because I was never a best man. And there I was, carrying his casket. God, to have something like that happen in such a quick time, it's devastating to everybody.
You feel the hurt, but it really doesn't sink in until the funeral's all over. And then the shock is over. It's reality. He's gone.
Fearing the case could go cold, a week after the murder, police step up the hunt for Jack's stolen jewelry, hoping the culprit is still attempting to sell it at a pawn shop.
We all just sort of fanned out and we took particular geographical areas. We knew there was still a person that was out there trying to sell Jack's jewelry, and we had to just keep holding out hope that the pawn shop would take their identification, that they would keep good records. That's what kept us going, honestly. There's a detective in the city of Pittsburgh who is a pawn shop records analyst, and I reached out to her and I told her what items that we had missing, and on August 4th I heard back from her, and she told me that she had found the jewelry where it had been sold.
Investigators race to the pawn shop.
We had to go take a physical look at it, see who, if anybody, was on camera. Some store policies, all they have to do is take an individual's driver's license number. They don't even have to make a photocopy of it. So we were trying to remain optimistic that somehow we would get an image of the actual person who tried to sell that jewelry. It could have been anyone at that point.
The pawn shop has surveillance video, and what detectives see on tape is jaw-dropping.
It was, oh my God.
We knew exactly who it was. In the video, it was Michael Apaya, which was Carol's nephew that Jack raised like one of his own.
This was a shock to everyone.
When we first had dealings with Michael, early on in the investigation, he did provide an alibi about businesses he was at, doctor's appointments.
Michael had his girlfriend Melanie saying that he was with her during the time that Jack would have or could have been killed. So it was kind of going back, trying to retrace what he had initially told us.
We still had to do a little bit more digging. We had to work on if we were missing something. Early on, when we talked to Michael, he had given detectives his phone number. I wanted to get his phone records.
While investigators wait for those records, they call Michael back in.
We are going to interview him and see what he has to say now that we have him on tape pawning his uncle's jewelry.
We decided that it would probably be ideal to bring Michael and his girlfriend Melanie in at the same time, being that she was the person who was providing an alibi for him, and chip away at that and see where the truth lied. We took them both back to our office and they were interviewed in separate rooms. Michael, in his interview, was initially very adamant that he had nothing to do with this. He denied involvement with the murder, involvement with the jewelry, and he just would not deviate from that.
Melanie stands by her story, too.
She provided alibis for him and just denials.
Melanie is pretty much telling us that he was with her during the time that Jack would have or could have been killed.
She was just defensive and trying to argue with what we knew was not true. And that was that he had sold Jack's jewelry. We showed her a picture of the jewelry and she tried to say it was hers. And we knew that was a lie.
With neither Michael nor Melanie cracking under the pressure, Detectives need something to break the deadlock.
When we got the information about the cell phone records, it was a huge break. We were very happy that it finally had come through. It was like everything came full circle.
Two weeks after Jack Parks was shot to death in his own home, investigators get the break in the case they needed: incriminating cell phone GPS data.
When I got Michael's phone records, I started to see where generally he spent most of his time, which was consistent with his home.
He told us he was in Sharpsburg, 20 minutes away from Jack's house, on the day of the incident.
Parts of his alibi checked out, cell phone data-wise, but there was an anomaly where about 11:45, his cell phone pinged over in the area of Jack and Carol's house. To me, the significance of 11:45 was it is in this time where Carol can't reach Jack.
It would be impossible to be in Sharpsburg and your phone ping off a tower in Kennedy Township. The amount of distance between the two, it wouldn't be possible. He was not at home. He was over near his uncle's house.
So 11:45, Michael's phone being over there was an aha moment. Those records don't lie.
Detectives want to see how Michael will react when confronted with his own cell phone records.
It was like he had just got smacked in the head with a baseball bat. He became very quiet, took a second, and he just let it all out.
I was suffering from PTSD, and the morning of July 21st, I asked Mel to take a ride with me. She just drove down with me and I parked her car. I told her to wait. She never got out of the car. She had no clue where we were going.
Michael's explanation of why he went to see Jack only raises more suspicion.
About a year ago, I was accused of stealing jewelry, and I wanted to make amends. I wanted to fix it. I knocked on a door to apologize and talk. At that time, he became hostile, and he choked me and swung at me.
His story changed to self-defense.
He had two hands around my neck, and at that time, I felt my life was threatened, and I had a pistol 380 on me. It went off.
Reconciling that just wasn't possible. Jack was shot one time, right close to his ear. Basically, someone held a gun to his head and executed him.
He fell to the floor, and I panicked. Ren grabbed jewelry, and I left.
Michael tells detectives he sold the jewelry for $1,000. Even more shocking is what he spent the money on.
You stated that that's one of the people you sometimes purchase narcotics from.
Yes. I gave him about $600 to $700.
In addition to that, several days later, what did he give you?
He gave me heroin.
Michael was following a path of substance abuse that was getting to be more addictive drugs, and his use was increasing. It wasn't recreational anymore. It was more the behavior of an addict.
It was heartbreaking for us to know that someone who was almost like Jack's son, a very close family member, would do something like that in exchange for a couple of dollars to get high.
I believe Michael went to that house to take jewelry. He knew Jack was there, and the only way he was going to get that jewelry is if Jack was dead. He walked up to the house, and as soon as Jack met him at the door and turned his back to him, he shot him, and he fell, and he died instantly.
On August 5th, 2014, Michael LaPaya is charged with first-degree murder.
To say to Carol, we know who did this. It was hard, but the hardest answer that we had for her is when she said, Michael who? And he had the same last name as her, really. It was hard to tell her that, it's your nephew. And it just hit her, and she was very upset.
You never thought that would happen. It would be that person.
It's still to this day so hard to believe that somebody that they loved Michael could have done something like this. I mean, what he did, I can't describe. There's no words.
At trial, Michael is found guilty. On December 9th, 2015, the 24-year-old is sentenced to life in prison.
He took a loving, caring man and just executed him. There was no winners. We lost Jack. Who won? Nobody.
I would never forgive him. Michael took away my best friend, my brother. He took away a lot from me. To this day, I still hate the guy.
Jack will never be forgotten. In the beginning, it's hard talking about a loved one without really breaking down crying. But you continue to talk about him. You keep their memory alive. And that's how he stays with us.
Every day, he's here in my mind, my heart, and my dreams. I see his face. Always smiling. I know he's flying with the angels.
A dedicated family man.
He was the best grandpa I could ever ask for my kids.
He loved his family. He was always there for everyone.
And a pillar of the community.
He helped a lot of the people who were down on their luck.
He was changing everyone's life.
Is senselessly murdered.
We noticed what looked like burn marks.
Is this a torture type crime? Was he actually tortured?
Detectives follow a trail of evidence.
I noticed my dad's truck was gone.
We knew that this truck was a key to solving this homicide.
That reveals devastating betrayals.
Marty would employ people from drug rehab centers.
You look at him and you're thinking that if anybody could do it, this guy could do it.
Then a surprise lead reveals a killer no one imagined.
I told you guys everything I know.
No, you haven't. We're pretty excited. We're just about to go nuts. It was a moment, I'll say that.
I never thought he would do something like that.
He's not the guy I would have picked to have committed this crime.
I was in complete shock.
Ardmore, Oklahoma is an honest, hardworking town built on family values.
We're a town of about 25,000 people, and it's a wonderful community.
It's a great place to live because you can have that large town feel and then yet come home to the small town atmosphere as well.
On the evening of November 15th, 2019, that small town feeling is shattered when police respond to a 911 call.
I had just sat down to eat when the phone rang, and it was dispatch advising me that officers were out on a possible homicide.
Police are checking in on a local man who hasn't been seen or heard from in several days.
They arrived, immediately looked in the window, could see the victim was laying face down in the floor, and they could see blood, so they forced their way into the residence. They knew immediately that he was deceased.
Minutes later, homicide detectives arrive at the scene.
The living room was just in disarray. There was items kicked over. There was blood on the couch. There was blood spatter on nearby items in the living room, the TV and pictures. And so we knew that there was a struggle that had taken place in that room.
When the detectives look at the body, they recognize the dead man.
I knew the victim. It was Marty Lucas. Most of the police officers knew who Marty was. Marty helped in the community. He helped a lot of the people who were down on their luck. Marty was a nice guy.
Detectives have to determine why 63-year-old Marty Lucas would be the target of such a heinous crime.
With the amount of trauma that Marty had suffered, it was a pretty violent, bloody scene.
You can see a lot of blood that has pooled around the body. You can see blood on the back of the body, on the head, and we knew that this was a death as a result of a beating or a blunt force trauma.
It's obvious that there was quite a struggle. Marty had hair in his hands. He had abrasions on his hands. I think he fought for his life. We noticed that there were pieces of what appeared to be a rock that had some moss on them. We found parts of it over by the couch where there was a large blood stain, and then parts of it over by him. We walked the exterior of the residence trying to find where maybe a rock would have come from. Immediately under the carport, there is a rock pathway. The walkway was missing a rock. So immediately we thought, well, whoever it was that did this took a rock from there and brought it with him. That indicated to us that this was premeditated.
And so we believe that he or she had used it as a weapon against Marty, and in the process of that, it was broken. We didn't find very large pieces of it, and so we believe that the majority of that rock was taken from the scene.
Police discover unusual markings on the body.
We noticed what looked like burn marks on his shirt, like his shirt had been ironed. My initial reaction was not only has he been hit by an iron, he's been burned by an iron.
Is this a torture type crime? Was he actually tortured? And so we believe maybe early on that the iron could have been a murder weapon, or at least an additional murder weapon in this case.
But what could have been the motive for such a violent attack?
Where his wallet would have been, someone had reached in and taken his wallet, because you could see the blood transfer, a handprint, like sliding down into his pants almost.
We were pretty clear that this was a crime involving a robbery and theft. His wallet was missing along with his phones.
Detectives make one more important observation.
We thought whoever had killed Marty knew him because there wasn't a sign of forced entry.
As investigators work, Marty's son Michael arrives at the scene.
I went to his house. It was a nightmare. It's the worst day of my life. I was in shock once I seen what was actually inside.
My husband called me. He said, my dad's dead. Someone killed him. And he was just screaming in my ear. He's like, I can't believe someone would kill my dad. I was in complete shock. He was such a nice person. Who would want to hurt him?
Marty Lucas was born into a military family in 1956. After graduating high school, Marty got married and had 2 children, Jennifer and Michael.
Michael and his dad were very, very close.
He loved his family. He was always there for everyone, you know. He made sure to make time for everyone. I used to call him Papa Smurf because he's just really funny. He's short. He's just a real, bubbly person. My parents, they divorced when I was pretty young.
Marty had struggles when my husband was a child and a teenager.
He had a substance abuse problem.
He had been in and out of trouble with the police, petty crimes that was a result of that addiction.
In 2007, Marty got a second chance when he was offered a job as a carpenter and found renewed purpose in life.
From then on, he straightened up and started his own business. Did really well.
He turned his life around. He was one of the few success stories that I'm aware of in my career.
Marty threw everything into rebuilding his life and his family.
He taught me a lot of work-related skills at an early age. He let me start working with him when I was 12 years old. And my son, he's 8. He's already started working him, basically, showing him skills like he did me when I was young.
He was the best grandpa I could ever ask for my kids.
Marty never forgot the second chance he'd been given and vowed to pay it forward.
Marty would usually go to the halfway houses and get people that had just got out of jail or that have a hard time with their life and see if they would want to work for him.
Basically, just giving workers second chances. He knew where they was coming from. He's been in their shoes.
He taught these men and women new skills. He treated them with the utmost respect.
Now investigators are left asking, who would want to bludgeon this well-respected contractor and caring grandfather to death?
He really had no enemies, and just to see that the way that he died was so brutal, it was very difficult to know that someone would be capable of doing something like that.
As detectives finish up at the crime scene, they turn to Marty's son, who gives them a crucial lead.
When I showed up, I noticed that my dad's truck was gone. That really threw me off because he wouldn't even let me drive his truck. He wouldn't loan the truck out to no one.
It was a Chevy pickup that originally had belonged to Marty's father. That truck was everything to him.
Detectives put out a bolo, or be on the lookout for the missing truck.
We needed to find the truck and maybe hope that either the suspect was still driving it or that they left behind evidence that we could identify.
We knew that this truck was a key to solving this homicide.
Investigators ask Marty's loved ones who they think would have seen him last.
We found out that Marty had been missing 2 or 3 days prior to the Friday the 15th that we found his body. And one of the things we were told by family and friends is that Marty goes to this Valero gas station every morning to get coffee.
The Valero had video that pointed down the street that the crime occurred on.
The manager said that Marty had arrived last at that store on Tuesday morning.
Detectives searched the security footage on the day after Marty was last seen alive, and 3 days before his body was found. The truck appears.
Marty's truck was very unique, dark green color with custom wheels. This green truck was in a big hurry and it pulled out in front of a semi-truck and it was almost in an accident that we had captured on video.
Investigators need to track down Marty's truck and whoever is behind the wheel.
We thought if we find the truck, we're probably going to find our suspect. This is going to be our guy.
Coming up, detectives uncover suspects with dark pasts.
They said, he's violent. I thought, good Lord, he gets violent. I don't know what I'm going to do.
She had frequented a lot of the local casinos.
She knew he had large sums of cash.
This was the break that we needed.
And the trail leads to an unlikely killer.
You're not going to think that this is someone who could kill somebody. That kind of broke open a whole new layer of the case.
The investigation took off at warp speed because we think we've got our guy.
Police investigating the murder of 63-year-old contractor Marty Lucas have obtained gas station surveillance video of someone driving his truck the day after he was last seen.
We collected hours and hours of video from the store. We were able to piece together some events that happened before and after the homicide.
The footage shows a busy street a few blocks from Marty's house. When detectives scour the rest of the security tapes, something grabs their attention.
On Wednesday morning, just after daylight, you can see a gentleman walking from the direction of Motel 6, and that person was walking towards Marty's home.
Is this unidentified man involved in Marty's murder?
You can see the suspect. Then an hour later, you can see on the video that there's one guy in the truck, that there's a single person in the truck.
And so we thought he might be the same person that was in that video. Marty did not allow just anyone to drive this truck. In fact, he did not allow anyone to drive this truck. We had to follow the stolen truck. That was really going to be our key to solving this case.
While officers continue their search for the truck, detectives return to speak to Marty's family and friends.
That's one of the things we were trying to just nail down is, who has Marty been hanging out with lately? Who has he been working with? Who has he had problems with, if anyone?
Police learn that along with helping people back up on their feet, Marty often forged friendships with those he employed.
Marty would become close with some of the men that he worked with or that he would hire and try to get to know them.
There's probably about 6 or 7 of them I actually got pretty close to. He built up friendships with them.
Amanda and Jason, Marty's neighbors, were very close to him. Amanda used to work for Marty because she paints very well.
He didn't look down on me for, I was trying to get my life back on track. And he told me he did it, so you can do it.
Marty would bring a lot of these folks to family dinners or get-togethers. He tried to bring them into his family.
But now, police want to know, had Marty's generosity and business exposed him to danger?
He paid all of his people in cash. And that's just the way it is in the day laborers with those guys. They need money that day, so they're going to work. And everything's cash.
To know that he could pay them daily with cash and help them out may have led to his demise.
Police also discover not all Marty's employees felt like part of the family.
It wasn't an easy road for Marty because sometimes he would have to tell them that they couldn't work for him anymore because they would steal from him.
Anytime you're working with people who have drug and alcohol problems, it's not uncommon for them to steal from their employers. And Marty had faced some of that. He wasn't afraid to stand up to these people. He would tell them, if you mess up, you're gone.
So our list of suspects was a mile long. We were given several names, but yeah, it was so difficult for investigators because it was going to be hard to track them down. Where they were staying, they usually don't keep jobs very long.
As detectives begin tracking down Marty's current and former employees, they ask his neighbor if anyone had a grudge against him.
Well, I initially went to interview Amanda, and she said, over the last month or so, there's been some rough-looking characters over there.
1 month before his death, he had been hanging out with these new people, and they were helping him work on his truck and then had to redo the job.
She thought maybe there had been some anger issues between the victim and those guys.
The day they were there working, Marty seemed to be pacing back and forth like they were taking too long, and he didn't want to, leave them at his house. They were making too big of a mess. He was upset about that.
Amanda didn't know the men, but had overheard Marty talk to the man in charge.
One was a guy named Junior, and so this was someone that we wanted to speak with.
There's just one problem.
We did not know who Junior was.
We knew this to be probably a nickname, and that's all we really knew.
While detectives plan to search for Junior, Amanda also provides them with the name of another one of Marty's former employees.
Marty met Chris Dyer at a Valero, the local convenience store that he went to nearly every morning to get a cup of coffee. Chris had recently been fired from that store, had a falling out with the owner, and Marty had employed him.
I know Chris Dyer had worked for Marty, had been fired from there for drug use.
He'd had a criminal past. He'd been arrested, had an addiction problem with drugs and alcohol.
Officers speak with the owner of the Valero station where Chris once worked.
The owner-manager of the Valero store reaffirmed that Chris was just not a very good guy, that he had had trouble employing him, and so he felt like that he needed to let Chris go because there was always drama, that Chris was basically just at rock bottom and desperate for money. Chris Dyer knew that Marty carried several $100s. When he paid him for a job, he would pay him at the end of the day, and he would pay him with cash.
Was Chris Dyer desperate enough to bludgeon Marty Lucas to death?
We were thinking that maybe it was a robbery gone bad, knowing that Marty had this money in his home because he was down on his luck and needed money for drugs. And so there was a lot of questions concerning Chris Dyer. One of our main priorities early on in the investigation is to find this subject named Junior, along with Chris Dyer. And so we wanted to talk to these people.
So we need to locate Junior, and we needed to talk to Chris as quickly as possible.
Police investigating the murder of contractor Marty Lucas are chasing multiple leads as they search for his killer and stolen truck. They've set their sights on two of Marty's employees, an unidentified man called Junior and a recently fired laborer named Chris Dyer.
A lot of these folks who are going through tough times, there is nothing permanent in their lives. There is nothing fixed in their lives. There is no stability. And so it was hard to track them down.
Following a lead, police questioned employees at the gas station where Chris had worked.
I spoke with the clerk that was on duty at the Valero, and she was able to give me a phone number to Gina Dyer. Gina is Chris's estranged wife.
She and Chris had been separated about a month because she had caught him cheating. He had gone back to drug use, and he was currently living at the Econo Lodge Hotel.
Detectives find Chris at the hotel and bring him in for an interview.
We really thought that we had something. We knew that Chris had easy access to Marty's home. Chris Dyer knew that Marty carried up to $500 to $600 in cash on him at any given point in time. So there's a rumor that some rumors went around that maybe you and him had gotten crossways and he had basically fired you. So you never had a disagreement?
No, not at all. Nope.
I'd like to know who in the hell's saying that, because that's bullshit. Pardon my French.
Police know better than to trust Chris's word.
We knew that Chris Dyer is down on his luck and had run-ins with the law, and well, maybe this is our killer. This is who it is. And then you get him in an interview room, and he's cooperative, and he's genuine. In fact, he was very distraught over Marty's death.
I hope you catch who the hell did it and fry their ass.
Yeah, I know, right?
But he was, man, that guy would do anything for anybody. He had some empathy there because he'd been in trouble before, too. And, yeah, sure. Tim sure didn't deserve to go out like that.
I think he considered Marty a friend, even though Marty had fired him.
Would you be willing for us to go through your truck, look through your truck, look to your hotel room, to see if there's anything that would be...
Yeah, I got
that we can roll you out? Marty had what we would consider defensive wounds to the hands. There was hair and blood under the fingernails of the body. And so we knew that there was some type of altercation. We knew that there had to be injuries on our suspect or suspects. And Chris had none of that. He had no recent cuts or bruises.
In order to officially rule Chris out as a suspect, detectives checked Chris's alibi.
He said he had gone to Kingston, Oklahoma, which is nearby, with Krista, his girlfriend. I believe it was the Wednesday before.
Police bring Krista in for an interview.
Is it possible that he slipped out of the room one night while you were sleeping, left, went and did something?
No. I'd have to say that just could not be possible.
His girlfriend also corroborated Chris's timeline as to what his story was. He had an alibi for that timeline, but he just didn't appear to be involved.
With nothing to link Chris to the murder, police are forced to let him go. Investigators hope Marty's preliminary autopsy report will provide more leads.
The significant thing for us from the autopsy was the fact the cause of death was blunt force trauma to the head, including the large gash to his head. Obviously, he was hit with something other than the rock because of the laceration on his head and because of the burn marks.
These burns that was on his back and part of his right arm came back as a post-mortem burns, which was very interesting to us, which means that they were caused after Marty had passed away. Initially, we were looking at these burns to the body as being type of a torture. Now, we believe the iron was used as a secondary weapon after. So the suspect didn't realize that. In his rage, he didn't know that Marty had already died, and he continued to hit him with this iron.
The preliminary autopsy report doesn't conclude whether the rock or iron ultimately killed Marty, and an exact time of death remains undetermined. Meanwhile, with the killer still at large, the worry takes a toll on Marty's family.
His son, Michael's always a quiet person, but he was like a walking zombie.
I couldn't sleep at night. I'd stay up during the day. It's fear for my family. Just because, I had no clue who would do this to my dad.
Michael was really panicked. Marty had so many different men working with him. I was very fearful of my life.
As police continue their search for other suspects, including the former employee Junior who worked on Marty's truck, a lead comes in about someone close to Marty who might have had a motive.
One of Marty's friends had called one of our patrol officers and told him that Marty was dating a lady named Donna Hargrave.
So, Donna Hargrave is somebody that probably everybody at the Ardmore Police Department is familiar with and knows on site.
We knew Donna had a drug problem as well. She did have a few run-ins with police and frequented a lot of the local casinos.
Could Donna's vices have pushed her to murder Marty?
She knew Marty and knew that he had large sums of cash, and because she is a known drug user, that perhaps she had enlisted the assistance of another known drug user to go rob Marty. That was a scenario, obviously had some possibility to it. That's why we needed to talk to Donna as quickly as possible.
Officers bring Donna down to the police department for an interview.
Upon bringing her into the interview room, she was handcuffed, and I knew she had not come up there willingly.
What's this about? Yes, if I'm not under arrest, then why do y'all have a reason to search me?
She was really uncooperative. She did not want to speak to us.
Okay, what is this about? Please get this over with and tell me what it's about.
Okay, so...
Somebody who I've been hanging with.
Yeah.
Okay, who?
Marty Lucas.
That people. That's straight up.
She definitely has a problem with Marty that was very suspicious, and it really struck a nerve in us because we wanted to know what this problem is.
Two days after finding the body of 63-year-old Marty Lucas, police are interviewing his former girlfriend, Donna Hargrave, a woman with a long criminal history and a grudge against Marty.
She had been arrested many times here in Ardmore. She had been known to be at least uncooperative with police, if not somewhat violent and unruly.
She didn't really care too much for Marty. We thought maybe she had something to do with his death.
He pissed me off because he was just being a dickhead.
So when you said F him, what were you mad at him about?
He just promised things and don't ever fall through. Like I talked to Marty about moving my trailer over to him. Over to his house or something. He said no.
He knew that she had not been clean and that she had not been trying to straighten up and that he wasn't going to help her as long as she wasn't trying to help herself.
Could Marty's rejection have led Donna to do something unthinkable?
So if I were to tell you something bad happened to Marty, what would you say?
What do you mean? What's wrong with him?
Well, if I were to tell you he was dead, someone did something to him, what would you say about that?
Are you serious?
Yeah. Yeah, that's why you're here. This was a girl that was very hardened, and for her to break down and to cry and was very genuinely upset over Marty's death.
She did say that they had recently broken up and that she hadn't seen him anytime in the last 4, 5, 7 days.
Can you kind of start like maybe Wednesday morning and tell me where you were, what you did, where you went?
At my mom's and I slept all day.
Okay.
And we were able to pretty quickly corroborate where she had been.
It was unlikely that she had anything to do with his death. However, we did not rule her out immediately.
Days after Marty's gruesome death, his family and friends come together to say their goodbyes.
Marty's funeral was amazing. It was very, very sad, though, because everyone who knew him knew that he didn't deserve anything ever bad to happen to him. Everyone loved Marty. Everyone.
There was quite a bit of his workers, even his past workers, that come to his funeral. It was a good day, but a bad day at the same time.
Meanwhile, police doggedly follow each and every lead.
We did have a large suspect pool because we didn't know who all might have been working for Marty. One of the things that we wanted to get identified was who Junior was that was working on the truck. So myself and another investigator said, we'll run by the halfway houses and see if we can get Junior identified. So we went over to the Broadway house, and the director there gave us the name of Clarence Bibb Jr. He said he thought Junior was from up by Oklahoma City, and he's got a pretty extensive record, including some assault. Well, we really believe that if Junior and Marty had gotten into an altercation over the payment of the truck motor, maybe he took the money, it got out of hand, he killed Marty, took Marty's money and the truck, and took it back to Oklahoma City to chop it up.
We found that law enforcement there knew Clarence very well. They knew his family very well. And they lived in several homes that would be described as a compound, like a family compound.
And they said, don't go out there without a lot of us. Clarence is violent, and so you don't go up there by yourself.
Detectives assemble a task force with local and state police and make the 2-hour drive to Junior's compound.
When I first got out there, I thought, man, this is a real possibility. Man, we might find our truck out here. So we went up and knocked on the door. And when Clarence showed up, I thought, good Lord, this is one large man. And if he gets violent, I don't know what I'm going to do. You look at him and you see what had happened to Marty, You're thinking that if anybody could do it, this guy could do it. He's big.
Detectives ask if he and Marty had fallen out over the work Junior had done on Marty's truck.
And he was happy with what Marty had paid him, and there was no disagreement.
He said that Marty paid him $500 more than he was supposed to because of the trouble that we went through.
And in fact, when I told him that Marty had died and that someone had caused his death, he too got emotional. Here, this big, mean, gruff country guy, and he's crying like a child over his friend's death.
He said, I wouldn't hurt Marty if somebody paid me to. He said he considered Marty a mentor and a friend.
Clarence denied that he had been in Ardmore recently. He gave an alibi that he had been at home with his mom and other family members around the time of Marty's death, and they corroborated his story that he was there. He fully cooperated with the investigation. He gave us his cell phone.
He let us have clothing and boots. He let us search his house. He let us search the property. And he let us just have free reign of whatever we wanted.
And we came up with nothing. I just remember thinking to myself, man, we are absolutely going nowhere with this investigation.
With nothing to link Junior to the homicide, detectives begin to fear the investigation is cooling down.
We had a pretty good idea that it wasn't Junior at that point. Donna Hargrave had a stone-clad alibi. Chris Dyer just didn't appear to be involved. I think both Bryce and I just were disheartened. We had no leads. We had no suspects. So we were just trying to figure out, where do we go from here?
Then, an unexpected call turns the case red hot.
Well, we got back to the station, and dispatch yells down to us, "Hey, they found your truck." We were dead tired, but you went from dead tired to wide awake in a hurry.
"4 days into the investigation of Marty Lucas's murder, detectives get the break they were looking for: Marty's missing truck.
And I remember the dispatcher telling me they found the truck. And I said, where is it? And they said in Springdale, Arkansas. And so this was the break that we needed.
We're pretty excited. We're just about to go nuts. We're like, okay, get a hold of Springdale police, get them on the phone, let's find out what we got going on. It was a moment, I'll say that.
Investigators asked Springdale police how Marty's truck had ended up over 300 miles away.
A citizen had called and told them that his friend had been in possession of the truck. And his friend, he identified as Jack Latham.
But who is Jack Latham? Detectives immediately ask Marty's family if they know the name. They learn Jack was one of Marty's most trusted laborers who hadn't been seen or heard from in months.
Jack Latham, he worked for my dad for a long time. He was a really hard worker.
Marty was extremely good to Jack. He gave him extra money here and there whenever he'd need it. Marty would bring him by my house sometimes, and they would occasionally ride around together. He seemed very quiet.
It was not unusual for people to come and go in Marty's business. Jack Latham worked for him on and off a couple of years prior to this.
When detectives dig into Jack's background, they learn he has a daughter and ex-wife in Ardmore and a checkered past.
He had an extensive criminal history for drugs and theft, but he's not the guy I would have picked to have committed this crime.
Jack Latham did minor misdemeanor type crimes, drug possession type crimes, but this is not a person that would even be on the radar because he had no really violent history.
So you're not going to think that this is a guy who could kill somebody, particularly not in the manner in which Marty was killed.
Investigators rush to Arkansas, where police have taken Jack into custody and seized the truck. But before speaking with Jack, they interview the man who first contacted police about the truck, Jack's friend, Raymond.
Raymond, he says to us that out of the blue, Jack calls on Friday night and says that he has got court on Monday. Can he stay for the weekend?
Raymond tells police Jack asked to get picked up at a local parking lot.
So he goes to pick him up, and he sees he's sitting in what looks like a pretty nice Chevy pickup. And he says, hey, whose pickup is that? He said, oh, it's a guy that I'm visiting. He let me come sit in it to wait on you. And he says to us, I didn't believe him. Monday morning, Jack says, just take me to jail. I've got warrants. So he takes him to jail, and then he goes back home and he looks to see what the warrants are for, and it's for theft. And he thinks, I wonder if that truck's stolen, because something doesn't feel right with that truck. So he goes back to where the parking lot where the truck is and sees it doesn't have tags on it.
And so Raymond knew that Jack was lying. He knew he needed to call the police.
We went and looked at the truck, and the truck looked pristine on the inside. But when we sprayed it with Blue Star, there was blood everywhere.
We knew in the back of our minds that this was the key, that Jack Latham was the key to Marty Lucas's death.
And then the investigation took off at warp speed because, yeah, we think we've got our guy.
We went to the Benton County Jail and interviewed Jack that day.
First thing I noticed about him is he's slight of build. He's not very big. He seems to be very reserved and meek. He doesn't seem to be what I would picture to be a killer.
Then police noticed something else about Jack's appearance.
He looked pretty bad. He had some injuries to his face. He had this greenish brown black eye or injury to his eye. He had a minor abrasion to his lip.
Could Jack have suffered his injuries while attacking his former boss, Marty? Police start by asking Jack when he was in Ardmore last.
Okay. I guess at some point in time you've been in Ardmore, been around Ardmore, or lived in Ardmore or something? Yeah, a long time ago, about 6 years ago.
Jack tells detectives he's recently been living 200 miles away in Enid, Oklahoma.
Who were you staying with? My brother knew.
Then, investigators cut to the chase.
We've been working on an investigation for the last almost a week now. Your name's come up. And before I can really get into a lot of questions with you and details and explain to you, why we're here and all that, I got to read you your Miranda rights.
After we Mirandized him, he said he didn't want to talk to us anymore.
Do you wish to make a statement, or will you answer any questions that we have for you today? No. No? Okay.
With Jack refusing to talk, police need to find a way to place him near Marty's house at the time of the murder.
So, in his initial interview, he tells us that he hasn't been to Ardmore, that he came down here from his brother's house in Enid. I called Enid PD, and they went out, they talked with the brother, they talked with the brother's wife. They said, yes, he has been here at our house.
But then, detectives get a stunning piece of information Jack hadn't shared.
His brother's wife said I'd put him on the bus to go see his wife and daughter in Ardmore on the Monday morning before Marty had been killed. So we knew he had gotten to Ardmore. The next day we got a hold of the bus and found out that yes, indeed, he had been at Ardmore.
With Jack still in custody, police drive back to Ardmore.
The detectives got a search warrant and looked through Jack's phone, and that led them to his ex-wife and daughter.
Did you see your dad in the truck last week?
No.
Okay. Do you understand what kind of trouble your dad's possibly in? He's been detained as a suspect in a homicide. So you for sure haven't seen your dad since he's been in Ardmore.
Investigators talk to Jack's ex-wife, Teresa, next.
Has he came to visit you lately? No?
I haven't seen from him or heard from him.
So would it surprise you to know that Jack is involved in a homicide here in Ardmore?
Yeah, because it doesn't seem like him.
Both of them said they haven't seen Jack. He hadn't been at Ardmore. They don't know what we're talking about.
And we knew this was not true because on Jack's phone we knew that he had called Teresa and Shelby.
And during that interview with Teresa, I laid it out for her. I just flat out told her I knew she was lying.
I'm not saying anything. I've told you guys everything I know.
No, you haven't.
Yes, sir, I have.
No, you haven't. And we can prove it. It's a matter of time before we put you in that truck. We put you in that truck, it starts getting serious in a real quick hurry.
Police start to question if Jack's ex-wife and daughter are involved in Marty's murder.
At that point, she decided that she didn't want to talk to us anymore, and she and Shelby left, and I just told her, we're not going to stop. We're going to solve this crime with or without you. The only question is, what's your role going to be?
Less than 24 hours later, police get a call.
The next day, early morning, Teresa called, said, I want to come back and talk. So from that, that kind of broke open a whole new layer of the case.
Police investigating the murder of Marty Lucas are trying to place his friend and employee, Jack Latham, at the scene of the crime.
We knew that he was coming here to visit his wife and daughter.
They both told investigators that they did not know where Jack was. They had not seen Jack. He had not been in Ardmore.
But Jack's daughter and ex-wife returned to the police station the next day.
Yesterday, you were pretty firm that you didn't know nothing.
I was really scared and I thought about it all night and I felt really bad. Really hit home, so I had to tell the truth. I did see Jack on the 11th and 12th.
Which was what, Monday and Tuesday?
Monday and Tuesday.
Okay.
And he dropped us off at my mom's house on the 13th in the morning.
Teresa says Jack stayed at an Ardmore motel on Monday and Tuesday nights.
They said Jack had called Marty to see if he had any work for him. And Marty said, no, I can't use you. I don't need you right now.
And do you know what day that was?
Tuesday night?
They both said that about 8 or 8:30 on that Wednesday morning, Jack left, sent an officer to Motel 6 to see if they had video. And sure enough, we've got video of Jack Latham leaving Motel 6, wearing the same clothes as the person that's walking. The Bolero camera picks up.
About an hour later, a green Chevrolet truck that we believe was Marty's truck shows up in the parking lot at Motel 6.
You watch him go over to a dumpster, throw something in the dumpster, which we believe was the rock and the iron. Where did he go get the truck?
He said his friend gave it to him.
Then, Jack did something even more suspicious.
When he came in, he went straight to the sink and washed his hands. He did wipe his face down, and he put his hoodie on, and he told me that he did something bad, but he wouldn't tell me what.
He said, we gotta leave, we gotta get out of here. He drops them off, and they don't see him again.
And so by then, we got enough to file charges on Jack Latham.
I called the family members and told them what we knew.
I was very shocked because Jack had been in my house around my children. He just acted very shy, but he didn't act like he would hurt anyone.
It was shocking to me because he treated Jack with respect like he did everyone else.
Police charged Jack Latham with first-degree murder and extradite him from Arkansas. When he arrives in Ardmore, Jack starts talking.
Jack told me that he was in desperate need of money. He had no job. He needed money for drugs. And he knew that Marty Lucas was the source of that money. Marty had told him no, that he knew that he wasn't clean. His story was that a physical altercation occurred, that he took a rock paperweight from the kitchen table, struck Marty with it, that, in his words, he freaked out, took the keys to the truck, and a few $100s from the wallet, and left the area.
Jack denies attacking Marty with a stone from outside or the iron.
There were some aspects where he seemed to truly be confused about what had happened because he was strung out on drugs, including, was there an iron used?
So what had really happened? Police have their own theory as to how the murder played out.
We believe that this was premeditated.
I think he went to Marty's house, and I think he picked that rock up on the outside of the house and he knocked on the door. Because I don't think he was going to take no for an answer. And when Marty told him no, a fight ensued in which he struck Marty with the rock. I think Marty fought back. He struck him with the iron, which was readily available, and then burned him with it, whether on purpose or on accident. He took the iron and he took the rock with him, and he disposed of the evidence, and he drove to Arkansas.
It was absolutely senseless over a few $100s.
Despite the evidence, prosecutors worry defense lawyers will try to argue Jack was desperate and never planned to kill Marty.
I thought that this case met the elements from a legal standpoint of first-degree murder, but then you have to be mindful of the fact that a jury would think also Jack's explanation is somewhat believable. He's a hopeless junkie. He's desperate for money.
With the family's consent, prosecutors charged Jack with second-degree murder.
We didn't want to risk going to trial and then letting him free.
In October 2020, Jack Latham pleads guilty and is sentenced to 25 years in prison.
I feel like we got justice. I know he's going to be locked up and my family's going to be safe.
Jack was very unexpected as a killer because he just didn't act like he was that type of person.
Jack Latham, he's still a mystery to me, you know, because just by being around him, I never thought he would do something like that.
He did this for nothing. There was no reason for nothing.
Marty was such a nice guy. But not only that, I mean, think of all the people whose lives he affected in a positive way. That's a sense of loss for our community.
When I lost Marty, I lost my life too. He was the most amazing person I could ever. Sorry.
Despite Marty's horrific death, the legacy of his compassion lives on.
My dad, he'd be very proud of the lives that he's changed in the community.
It made me appreciate everything about Marty and the second chances he gave to everybody, because it made me feel like I should give people second chances.
A college student with a bright future.
He was a journalism and history major who planned to go to law school.
He had a huge social group. He was very well liked.
Is found murdered in the middle of town.
The wound was so deep, the blade of the knife nicked the spine.
Sending police hunting for an elusive killer.
This case was a true mystery, a true whodunit.
He was depicted as a promiscuous young man who could have been killed by anybody.
And when they catch him, it leaves everyone blindsided.
They did not want to believe this was true.
And that was pretty surprising.
When we figured out who did it, I refused to believe it.
Columbia, Missouri is best known as the home of the University of Missouri.
I think many people would consider us a college town. This is a city, small city with 30,000 students, coming in.
For the Columbia Police Department, a neighborhood of rowdy kids is usually as bad as it gets.
Mainly a lot of college-related crimes, such as the parties and alcohol offenses. Homicides in general were unheard of.
That all changes one afternoon in June 2004.
I received a call that someone had found a body in the East Campus area, and because I'm the East District Commander, I headed towards the scene.
Schwartz arrives to find a team of officers already securing the area.
The body was in between two apartments, lying face up, and he only had boxer shorts on. His throat had been slit, most probably with a knife. It was a very large and gaping wound. It was very deep. There's a few other abrasions on the upper body. So it was a very violent action, just a very violent crime.
I was a student in college, and seeing this in a place I knew really well was tough.
The forensics team processes the scene while police search the area carefully, but they can't locate a murder weapon or ID on the body.
We started talking with people in the area to see if anyone knew this particular person.
This was a part of town where everybody really knows everybody else. Everybody knows everybody else's business.
One onlooker thinks they recognize the dead young man.
The body was identified as Jesse Valencia. He was a young man attending the University of Missouri, and we found out that he lived in the neighborhood, block and a half from where we found his body.
The 23-year-old lived alone in an apartment just off campus. Police need to know if that's where the crime got its start.
We opened it up and started to look for any initial type evidence, trying to figure out who could have done this and for what reason.
The forensic team does a thorough sweep of the apartment, bagging Jesse's cell phone, cigarettes, and other items, while police canvass neighbors to see if they noticed anything suspicious the night before.
His neighbor admitted coming home drunk about 3 in the morning and going to bed. He was awakened by yelling that was going on next door. This neighbor actually pounded on the door and then went back to sleep.
The neighbor recalls that the shouting was late, almost 4 o'clock in the morning. Police are curious who was in the apartment with Jesse and what could they have been arguing about.
That obviously started to help us narrow down the time frame of when this may have occurred. But that's all we had to work with at that point.
There were no real clues as to who had murdered this young man.
A few hours into the investigation, another young man arrives at the scene in a flood of tears.
This guy named Jack Berry told investigators he was Jesse's former boyfriend who just lived a few blocks away. A friend had called Jack Berry saying that Jesse was dead.
If he had a relationship with Jesse Valencia, he was definitely a person the detectives wanted to talk to.
Jack agrees to come down to the station for routine questioning. But first, he helps detectives track down Jesse's family in Kentucky.
They called me on the phone, and a detective told me that Jesse had been killed, and I pretty much just took off running through the house and ran out my front door screaming. Just too much. Even when he was a little boy, Jesse never had trouble making friends. Everybody wanted to be around him because he was constantly smiling and laughing. And Jesse told me he was gay when he was 10 years old. He started crying, he got pretty emotional, and he said that he was afraid that I was going to hate him. And I told him that there was nothing in the world that could make me hate him. After that, he seemed pretty comfortable with himself.
As a teen, Jesse's confidence bloomed.
Jesse loved to talk. He loved meeting new people, making new friends. When he was in high school, he wanted to try modeling. He did really well at it, and I always thought that he wouldn't go back to school, but a year from the date that he told us that he wanted to be a model, he said he wanted to be a lawyer. That's what he decided to do, and that's why he went to Missouri.
Linda said he was a journalism and history major who planned to go to law school.
Jesse Valencia was one of those larger-than-life characters. He had such a big personality. He had a lot of friends. He had a huge social group.
Now, detectives need to find out who cut Jesse's life short in such a horrific way. They start by asking Jack Berry about his relationship with Jesse.
Jack told them he and Jesse had just split up, and he was trying to make Jesse realize it's over. I need to move on. Jesse still loved Jack, so he was having a hard time letting go. But Jack was already starting to see someone else.
Was it a fight with a spurned lover that the neighbor had heard in the middle of the night?
it was possible Jack had some type of confrontation with Jesse that led to his death.
And when investigators ask Jack for an alibi, it turns out that he doesn't seem to have one.
His alibi was, I was home sleeping alone. At that point, Jack Barry had become the primary suspect.
Coming up, detectives discover a secret romance
They had started a relationship very quickly.
that uncovers a killer's trail
A lie is the next best thing to a confession.
to a surprising culprit.
It was shocking on many levels.
Detectives in Columbia, Missouri are questioning a man who had recently split up with murdered college student Jesse Valencia.
Jack Barry wanted to end the relationship. He wasn't happy with the relationship any longer.
Jack paints a picture of a couple growing apart after 2 years of dating. But a piece of evidence found at Jesse's apartment makes detectives question his story.
The investigating detectives found Jesse's cell phone, and the cell phone showed that Jesse had called Jack Barry at about 3:18 that night.
The neighbors had heard some type of argument from the victim's apartment, approximately the time frame of when this occurred. So that would be obviously suspicious.
But Jack insists he was nowhere near Jesse's apartment.
Jack said that he had already gone to bed that night and that he heard a knock on his door at 3:18 in the morning, and then he simultaneously got a phone call from Jesse's cell phone. It was routine that Jesse would use his cell phone as sort of a doorbell. Jack said he was tired and he really didn't feel like getting up and talking to his former boyfriend at 3:18 in the morning, so he didn't go to the door.
Jack says he rolled over and went back to sleep. But police aren't so sure and question him for hours.
Finally, Jack broke into tears, and he said he regretted that, but he didn't go to the door because what happened might not have happened had he done that. His reaction was so genuine, and it was clear that Jack still had a lot of love and affection for Jesse.
And it's becoming clear to detectives that Jack didn't kill Jesse, but they press him to see if he might know who did.
Jack said that he had no clue as to what would have happened to him and why anyone would have killed him.
23-year-old Jesse Valencia, the MU student.
Police found Valencia's body on East Campus, throat slashed.
As the story of the murder hits the 11 o'clock news, it sends shockwaves through the city.
I would say this was probably one of the most gruesome killings in Columbia. We don't have very many murders here.
The murder of a gay young man just a week before the city's first Pride Fest horrifies the progressive college community.
For anyone who thinks that they can get away with something like this so heinous is just unthinkable. We know from past homicides that a majority of them are with people that they know. Anyone who had had contact with him, whether in a sexual relationship or a social relationship, the detectives wanted to talk to.
Police begin to make the rounds of Jesse's wide circle of friends, wondering if there's anyone in his life that might have harbored any kind of grudge. One name they hear over and over is Zev Feintuck, a student that Jesse had met 2 weeks earlier at a political rally.
Jesse's friends had said, oh, maybe it was this guy because he didn't seem quite normal. There was something that made him a little bit different from other people.
Several of Jesse's friends, they said that Zev wasn't comfortable in his own skin and that he had a lot of issues with being himself. There was some contention whether Zev and Jesse were having a romantic relationship. They were spending a lot of time together.
Rumors about the two young men had been swirling, and after Jesse was murdered, the gossip about Zev began to take a sinister tone.
Somebody saw someone matching his description looking disheveled and crying, walking down the street the morning of the murder, and a car he was known to drive was seen in that area.
That's when the detectives started looking towards him and started talking with him and seeing what he had to say.
Detectives call Zev down to the station, but he denies that the rumors about him and Jesse are true.
Zev said they'd never had a sexual relationship, but they were friends. Then Zev would come over and hang out with him.
Police questioned Zev about where he was between 3 and 5 a.m.
His alibi was I was home sleeping. He was a young man who still lived with his parents.
They subject Zev to a voice stress analysis test to see if he is telling the truth.
It showed untruthful, so deceitful. That did seem to be some evidence of guilt.
Detectives quickly follow up with a visit to his parents, but they confirm that their son was home all night.
Zev's parents had said that when Zev would leave, he would always go through the garage door to get to the car, and so it made a big racket. They would have awakened his parents, and they said there's no way that he would have left that night. It seemed like he did have an alibi.
With Zev Feintuck discounted as a suspect, detectives continue to piece together the last hours of Jesse Valencia's life.
The detectives were talking with several of the friends of Jesse Valencia to see where he was on the evening and early morning hours that this occurred.
Police learned that Jesse had gone to a party at a friend's house around 11 p.m. on the night he was killed.
Some friends of Jesse said that Friday night, Jesse was at a party with a young man named Ed McDevitt.
Ed McDevitt was somebody Jesse had just met. Ed was a chef in town. They had met just a couple of nights before and had started a relationship very quickly.
Jesse's friends tell police that the two men left the party together, heading in the direction of Jesse's house.
And that was around 3 o'clock in the morning on the last night of Jesse's life.
It appears as though Ed McDevitt might have been the last person to see Jesse alive.
And it was possible Ed McDevitt went home with Jesse and then killed him.
"12 hours after finding Jesse Valencia's body, detectives track down 22-year-old Ed McDevitt and bring him down to the station.
Jesse had met Ed McDevitt 2 days before his death and invited Ed to come home with him on that Friday night, the last night of Jesse's life, so he became a suspect at that point.
But Ed claims that he and Jesse went their separate ways soon after they left the party.
And he was talking with Jesse on the phone at the time he was walking home on the last night of Jesse's life.
Ed says that his roommate was up when he arrived home and invites detectives over to talk to him themselves.
There's nothing found when they searched his home, and everything Ed McDevitt told the officers, they could verify by looking at his cell phone records, by talking to his roommate, and at that point, investigators let him go.
Police hope that DNA results pending at the lab will help them link one of their suspects to Jesse's murder. Desperate for answers, Jesse's mom grows more despondent, recalling an eerie premonition Jesse had years ago.
From the time Jesse was 7 years old, he had told me that he was going to die at a young age. He said, "I'm going to die at a young age, and I love all of you, and I always will love you, but I'll be okay." He would always end it with, "I'll be okay." And of course I got emotional and upset over it, but he said, "We've got to make the most of what time I'm here."
A day after Jesse's murder, detectives receive the autopsy report and study it closely for clues.
The medical examiner concluded that Jesse had been murdered in the area of 3, 4, 5 o'clock in the morning. The cut to his neck was the only knife wound, and it was the cause of death. And it was so deep, the blade of the knife had also nicked the spine.
The lack of defense wounds suggests that Jesse had been taken by surprise.
The most mysterious thing was that across his breastbone there were bruises, and in the middle of his back between his shoulder blade there were bruises.
The evidence suggests that Jesse was easily overpowered in the vicious attack. Investigators hope that additional lab work will reveal even more and point to a killer.
There were fingernail scrapings collected during the autopsy, and also some hairs were found on his chest, and that was sent to the crime lab for analysis.
Until the crime lab turns up DNA, police have no choice but to move on to their next lead.
A lot of Jesse's friends were being brought in, they were giving evidence, they were helping out with information.
One of those friends is a fellow student named Andy.
Andy Schermerhorn was a young man who had what they called a friends with benefits arrangement with Jesse.
Andy was out of town the night Jesse was killed. But the day after the murder, he comes forward to share a shocking story.
Andy Schermerhorn told the investigating detectives that Jesse was having sex with a Columbia police officer.
He was having a relationship with an officer. I was surprised.
Andy nervously reveals an encounter 3 weeks prior at Jesse's apartment.
Andy Schermerhorn said that on May 14th, he had been at Jesse's home at night, and there was a knock at the door. Jesse went to the door, and a uniformed police officer was there. And Jesse said, "It's okay, oh, it's okay, he's cool, he's cool."
According to Andy, the officer took off his gun belt, and the next thing Andy knew, the three of them were fooling around.
After it was over, the police officer said, "This has got to be a secret."
A secret affair between an officer and a murder victim is a major red flag.
If any one of our officers had been seeing Jesse Valencia, why is he not being forthcoming? If you have nothing to hide, why not just tell us?
Detectives need to know who this officer is.
They said, "Do you think you'd be able to recognize him if you saw him again?" And he said yes, because it had only been about 2 weeks since that incident.
Detectives ask Andy if he'll look through a book containing the photo of every officer in the Columbia Police Department.
They were having him walk down the hall where he was going to look at the yearbook. Andy Schermerhorn flipped through it without even looking at the pages, closed it, and Schermerhorn began trembling, and he said, "I passed him in the hallway just now. It was him."
The day after the murder of Jesse Valencia, detectives in Columbia, Missouri learned that he was allegedly having a relationship with a local police officer.
Jesse's friend Andy Schermerhorn told the investigating detectives that he was an eyewitness to this sexual activity. Schermerhorn began trembling, and he said, "It was him that I passed in the hallway just now." And that was Stephen Arthur Rios.
Stephen Rios' commander believes Andy must be mistaken about the officer's identity.
When the detectives told me that maybe Steve had been having a relationship with the victim, I told the detectives, "You're absolutely wrong. He was married to a wonderful young lady, and they had just had their first child."
Schwartz knows the 27-year-old Rios well. The 5-year veteran is one of the department's rising young stars.
Steve was very outgoing. He communicated well, very ambitious.
He was a young officer who was on his way up in the department because he was a go-getter and a very popular officer.
Detectives don't know if Andy is telling the truth, but they're certainly anxious to get Rios' side of the story.
If he was having a relationship, that does not mean that he had killed Jesse Valencia.
Rios is out of town for a couple of days on a camping trip with coworkers. So they begin tracing Rios' steps the day Jesse's body was found.
He went in for his work shift later in the afternoon, like he normally did, and at that point, the body had been found.
The sergeant on duty that day had told me that Rios was coming to the scene to help identify the body. He had contacted the on-duty sergeant, but said he could help.
Rios said that I met Jesse Valencia when I gave him a ticket back on April 18th.
Investigators pull a copy of the incident report to see if it backs up Rios' story.
April 18th of 2004, some friends of Jesse's were having a party, and the party kept getting loud, and the police showed up to get them to quiet down. And Jesse, this intelligent pre-law major, said, "What's your probable cause?" Well, that got him arrested, and Stephen Rios gave him a municipal court summons for obstructing a governmental operation.
A call to Jesse's mother corroborates the report.
Jesse told me that when he was arrested, that the cop that drove him down to the jail was really nice and that he talked to him all the way down to the station. And he said, I kind of felt a little bit uncomfortable because he kept asking me personal questions about my life that I didn't really feel like he should be asking me when he was trying to arrest me for something.
But the arrest wasn't the end of the officer's interest. The very next day, he turned up at Jesse's apartment.
After he got arrested, Jesse called me on the phone and he said, the cop that arrested me last night showed up on my doorstep. He said he had to ask me some more questions. But the questions he was asking Jesse were more of a personal nature. They went out a few times after that, and he would come to Jesse's apartment and just show up unannounced, even when he was in uniform.
Linda doesn't know much more than that, but thinks that Jesse's friend Joan Sheridan might. When they track her down 2 days after the murder, Joan confirms that Jesse saw the officer more than once after the arrest.
He had told her that the officer would typically come by sometime after 3 o'clock and before 6 o'clock in the morning, just for sex, and then leave.
Joan reveals that she got a close-up look at the officer one night when he showed up at Jesse's place.
They showed her a photo lineup, and she was able to pick the person that came by to Jesse's apartment that night. And it was Stephen Rios.
Detectives now have more evidence that Rios was having a scandalous relationship with Jesse. And when they hear what Joan says next, they suspect he may also have a motive for murder.
Joan said that when he went to court for his municipal court summons, Jesse assumed it would be dismissed since he was having sex with the arresting officer, and it had not been dismissed, and that had angered Jesse. So Jesse had told Joan that the next time the police officer comes over, And I'm going to tell him that I have a little secret the chief of police might want to know if he doesn't get that ticket dismissed.
The detectives called me and told me that Jesse was threatening to contact the chief and expose Rios. Finally, the light bulb went off. You start looking at who had a motive to kill Jesse Valencia. Rios was very worried about his job. He was very worried about his reputation. He would be very devastated. He would be embarrassed by this information coming out.
That's when Rios became the suspect.
It's a serious matter to accuse one of their own. Investigators quickly regroup to plan the best approach.
They didn't feel they were ready to interview him yet. They were wanting to have the DNA evidence come back before they actually confronted him. But all of a sudden, Rios showed up at the police department and said, could I talk to you for a second?
He had this look on his face, like he was very upset. Very upset.
Coming up, detectives get a devastating phone call.
Steve called me, crying, very upset, and he said, I've done a bad thing.
And the investigation takes an unexpected new turn.
The officers found him on the 4th floor of a parking garage.
What was he thinking?
Detectives investigating the murder of college student Jesse Valencia are preparing to confront their suspect, police officer Steven Rios. But Rios goes on the offensive first.
Rios said he was hearing from other people that Jesse was having an affair with a Columbia police officer. And I just wanted you to know that I did give him a ticket, but that's the only contact I had with him, and it's certainly not me.
But detectives tell him flat out that they've heard a different story.
They said, we've talked to a woman who said that she was at Jesse's apartment one night when you showed up. Rios sat there for a minute, and then Rios said, well, you know what, we did become social friends, but it never became anything like a sexual relationship. They said, we've talked to another young man who says he was actually having sex with Jesse, and you came by that night and actually came in and joined them on the bed. And Rios said, what, sex? Like it was the most astounding and false accusation you could ever heard.
He was getting very agitated with the detectives. He's a very prideful person, and he was very upset because they didn't believe him.
It's easy to see that Rios is lying. Detectives bear down hard. And finally, their suspect breaks.
Finally, Rios admitted that he had sex with Jesse. He tried to claim it was just that one time, and then it evolved into that he had had sex with Jesse as many as 6 times.
It's a stunning admission, and a strong motive for murder.
He was embarrassed. He obviously did not want this information out if he was keeping it a secret to begin with, especially from his wife, in his family.
Police may not have the physical evidence to prove that Rios is a killer, but they do have something that's almost as good.
We were able to prove that he was lying.
There's an old saying in law enforcement that a lie, a provable lie, is the next best thing to a confession. And Steven Rios was caught in lots of provable lies.
But detectives aren't finished interrogating their suspect. They ask for his whereabouts the night that Jesse was killed.
He said he had been at work and he got off at 3 o'clock in the morning like he normally did. And he said that night He'd gone onto the rooftop of the parking garage with a few other officers, and they had drank a few beers before they went home. And he said he got home about 5:15 to 5:30, took a shower, and got in bed.
Detectives grill Rios for over 3 hours, looking for any cracks in his story.
He still maintained he'd had nothing to do with Jesse's death. At that point, investigators let him go. He was definitely a suspect, but the question remained, can we prove it beyond a reasonable doubt?
Investigators' next step is to create a timeline for the night of Jesse's murder and see how Rios' alibi fits in.
His wife corroborated that he had gotten home in that 5:15 to 5:30 time frame.
Other officers confirm Rios worked until 3 a.m. and then had some drinks with them on the rooftop that night. The security door records reveal that Rios left the roof at 4:37 a.m., 45 minutes before he got home.
One of the detectives actually drove from the parking garage to Jesse's home the same time of night, and it was 3.5 minutes. He then drove from the scene of the murder to Rios' home, and it was 10 minutes.
This gave a window of time of 20 to 30 minutes that were potentially unaccounted for at the time that Jesse Valencia was apparently killed.
And this gave us a timeline that could show that Rios could have done this murder within that time.
Investigators search Rios' home, car, and work locker, but they uncover nothing to tie him to the crime. Then, out of the blue, Captain Schwartz receives an alarming phone call.
Steve called me, crying, very upset, and he said, I've done a bad thing. The first question I asked him was, where are you? And he said that he was in Kansas City and that he had bought a shotgun. I really thought he was going to kill himself. And my first reaction was no. I said, you need to just stop what you're doing. Just come back. Just come back to Columbia and we'll get through it.
Captain Schwartz is able to talk Rios into driving the 150 miles back home, where police take him into custody.
Still wasn't under arrest, but he was put on a 96-hour hold for an involuntary commitment to a mental facility, just for observation to make sure that he wouldn't kill himself.
But Stephen Rios is still despondent. He manages to evade hospital security, and soon the entire Columbia police force is on alert.
I got a phone call that Steve had escaped and was on top of the parking garage, threatening suicide.
One of the officers found him on the 4th floor of a parking garage, and Rios climbed up on the wall, claiming he was going to jump.
When they called me and said he's on top of the garage, he's threatening suicide, what was he doing? What was he thinking?
Police officer Stephen Rios, a suspect in the murder of Jesse Valencia, has escaped protective custody and is threatening to leap to his death.
This is one of the busiest parts of campus. It's about 7 o'clock at night. He goes to the roof of the parking garage, starts threatening to jump.
There's a crowd below. There are people watching this. People are videotaping this, taking pictures. It's bizarre.
Police arrive on the scene to try to talk Rios off the ledge.
All I could think of was, here we go again. Why are you putting everyone through this? It was just putting everyone through a nightmare.
After a tense 45-minute standoff, they finally managed to talk Rios back from the brink.
He was taken back into custody and again put into a mental facility and put on a suicide watch while we were finishing our investigation to determine whether or not he would be charged with Jesse's murder.
3 weeks after Jesse's murder, the analysis of the hairs found on Jesse's chest give police the evidence they need to charge Rios with the crime.
They were able to say the persons who left those hairs on Jesse's chest, limb hairs that would have come from somebody's arm, those hairs matched to Stephen Rios. And that's when we realized that they teach Columbia police officers at the training academy how to administer a chokehold, and that cuts off the blood flow to the brain and renders a person unconscious in 3 to 8 seconds. That could account for these limb hairs in addition to the bruises that went across the front of his chest and in the middle of his back.
On July 1st, 26 days after Jesse Valencia's body was found, Stephen Arthur Rios is arrested and charged with first-degree murder.
Did you kill Jesse Valencia?
No, I did not.
During the week-long trial, prosecutors lay out their theory of how the murder went down.
Rios came by after his shift was over, thinking they were going to have sex. Jesse confronted him.
Jesse was threatening to contact the chief and expose Rios.
And he knew his career and his happy marriage would probably be over. And that had angered Rios. The neighbor heard this argument going on, and Jesse's yelling, "Stop it, stop it." Jesse, then clad only in his shorts and barefoot, ran out, being chased by Stephen Rios. The Stephen Rios caught him from behind and choked him into unconsciousness, put him on the ground, cut his throat, and that's what I believe happened in the last minutes of Jesse Valencia's life.
Prosecutors know they have a strong case, but convincing a jury that a police officer is a murderer is sure to be a hard sell.
If even one of the 12 jurors feels like it's not the person, then you have a hung jury or a not guilty verdict.
After 8 long hours, the jury returns with a verdict.
The jury finds the defendant, Stephen Arthur Rios, guilty of murder in the second degree.
I did feel a great sense of relief and even pride when the case was over and Stephen Rios had not gotten away with murder.
Stephen Arthur Rios receives a sentence of life in prison for the slaying of Jesse Valencia.
I don't feel like that Jesse really got justice because I wanted the death penalty for him. He took my whole life away from me.
Anytime you have an officer who has done a heinous type act like this and taken someone's life, it is a huge stain. And for law enforcement everywhere.
For Jesse's mother, her son's legacy is in the way he lived his life, not the way it ended.
I want people to remember the Jesse that was constantly laughing and trying to make other people happy, because that's what Jesse lived for. He didn't want anybody to be sad. There's always the empty space. Everybody still misses him, and we talk about him daily.